Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Councillor White, John White, and I'm the chairman this evening. And normally sitting on my left, I have Vice Chairman Councillor Heaney. She will not be sitting on the first three items anyhow, but I'm told there is an accident somewhere on the top road, so it could well be that she's been delayed by that. Right, the other councillors who are members of the committee are sitting on the side tables, and they're the ones who will debate and ultimately vote on each of the applications in front of us tonight. On my immediate left and right, I have the TDC officers, including Head of Planning and the committee solicitor. This is a formal committee, and it's important that the councillors can hear all of the debate and presentations, and therefore I respectfully ask that you do remain quiet and don't interrupt the speakers. Now, the normal business of planning applications is the officer gives a presentation, then we have public speaking, and then any further comments from the officer, and then finally the committee members themselves ask questions, debate, and finally vote. However, this evening we have got the first three items on the agenda are deferred items, and therefore there's been no site visit today because we've visited them before, and we've also heard the public speaking on the first three items, so there will be no public speaking on the first three items. I'll finally add that this meeting is recorded by the council and will be available on the council website in approximately 10 days' time. So that takes us to the agenda, and I ask for any apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor McWilliams with Councillor Turner as her substitute, and also Councillor Cawthron with no substitute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, councillors, I'm inviting you to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or personal interests and the nature of it in relation to the items on the agenda this evening. Are there any? Councillor Turner.
Thank you. For the avoidance of doubt, Mr Chairman, thank you. As I'm substituting and I wasn't on the committee for the first three, for items 5, 6 and 7 of the agenda, I shall be taking no part whatsoever. I shall probably stay in the room for one of them and then I shall disappear until called back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. With regard to A2, the long road west of Clacton Road, Mistley application, I'm predetermined, so when that is up for discussion, I will leave the room. I've also been lobbied with regard to the application A4 at Brooklands Gardens, Jaywick. However, I am not predetermined and feel that I'm quite capable of coming to an independent conclusion. And with regard to A6, the long road application, I'm also the ward councillor and a parish councillor for Lawford. However, I was not present at either the planning committee or the Lawford parish council meeting when it was discussed. And again, I'm not predetermined on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any further declarations? No. My Vice Chairman would, I'm sure, have said, if she'd been here, that some of the items on the agenda she also didn't attend the site visits at that time, and therefore she will not be commenting on those.
Yes. Can I speak, John?
Please.
Apologies for being late. There's a car crash on the Colchester Road and huge queues. Quite a nasty crash. Unfortunately, there's two which I will not be. I wasn't here for. I think it's the first two. I will actually leave the room because I wasn't here when they were passed last time.
Thank you very much. Right, that takes us then to A1, which is a planning application for the land to the west of Low Road, Dovercourt. It's application 17/02168, and this is an outline application.
We don't appear to have covered items 2 or 4 on the agenda minutes.
Thank you.
Questions on notice?
I will take the minutes, certainly. On item 4, there have been none, but I will take, thank you for that, the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 26th of June. Any comments, omissions, errors that anybody has spotted, or can I sign those as a true and correct record? Thank you for that, and thank you, sir. Yes? Please.
Oh, sorry.
Chairman, sorry to be a pest at the very beginning of the meeting. With regard to the questions on notice part, obviously that has come back in with regard to this committee and also the 2 O&S committees. What sort of questions are we allowed to ask you? And, you know, that's a very wide-ranging thing that we could do. So I'd just like some guidance on what you may get hit with next committee meeting. Thank you.
I understand you can ask me where I'm going on holiday. It's so wide that there aren't guidance on that. And just as it is a new item for our agenda, any member of the committee may ask the chairman a question on any matter in relation to which the council has powers or duties which affect the tendering district and which falls into the terms of reference of this committee. The strong point about that is it has to be in at least 2 days before the meeting. But other than that, I haven't been given any guidance. Right. Yes, I just asked the solicitor to comment on that.
I think, as with full council, if you sort of approach it in a similar sort of way, if you wanted any guidance as to whether or not it comes within that criteria, although it looks quite wide, obviously, you are looking, so it relates to the council and powers or duties, so if you wanted any clarification, then if you sort of could seek that from Lisa or I ahead, we can give you some guidance as on a case-by-case basis. I think is probably the easiest way to look at it.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
I'm completely bewildered by this, Chairman. As I imagine most of us are here. You mean to say that we cannot, if we're debating something, we have to give 2 days' notice of what we wish to debate and the questions we're likely to ask?
No.
Right, good.
No.
Anything that's extraneous to the agenda?
Yes.
Right, there we are. It's simple, really, isn't it? Thank you.
Right, I hope that's put right. And now we'll move on then to A1 at Low Road, Dovercourt.
Can I just comment?
On this application.
It's just that I can sit on that one. I can't. I said I couldn't sit on 1 and 2, but actually I mean 2 and 3. If you could make that
Okay,
clear.
yeah, okay, that's...
Sorry, I said I couldn't sit on 1 and 2, but actually I meant 2 and 3. I can sit on this one.
Right, and Suzanne's going to put this one, I think.
Okay, this is an application on Land West to Low Road in Dovercourt. It's an outline application with all matters reserved except for access, and it's for the erection of 300 dwellings with vehicular access, green infrastructure provision, which includes the children's play area, footpaths and cycleways, and structural landscaping. The application went to committee on the 28th of March, and members deferred the application to enable the officers to do 3 things: to chase up on all the outstanding consultation responses, to discuss with Highways the possibility of moving the southern access point opposite an existing access, and the possibility of an addition to a roundabout, and to discuss the possibility of wall graves being on the application site. So all the necessary consultation responses have been received, and all the updates are in bold in the report before you. So as a reminder, the application site is outlined in red, and it's located to the west of Low Road. It is allocated for housing development in the draft local plan, but does lie outside the settlement development boundary in the saved plan. So from the aerial photograph, so the site is in this location. It's currently an arable field, extending from Low Road on this side to Dean's Lane, which is a public footpath and a track. And the site rises considerably from the southern end towards the properties, rear gardens of the properties in Oakley Road. So as mentioned, the application is in outline, and the only detailed consideration is for access to this plan is predominantly illustrative, and it demonstrates that the site can accommodate 300 dwellings with adequate parking and garden provision and open space. So this shows a bit more in terms of the pedestrian and vehicle routes through the site. We've got two vehicular access points. One in this location, which serves the northern part of the site, and one to the southern area in that location. And emergency vehicular access only in this location. So in terms of the consultation responses, when it was previously brought, Highways consultations was outstanding. They have provided a consultation response, and that's detailed in your report, and they have no objection to the proposal. They've also considered moving the suggestion of moving the southern access and to provision of a roundabout at the Gravel Hill road junction, and they would not support this arrangement as it would create a 4-arm mini roundabout, and they're of the view that it would exceed the maximum peak hour traffic flows recommended, that it would introduce additional conflict and perform poorly in terms of highway safety, and that mini roundabouts generally rely on balanced traffic flows on all arms, and that would not be the case. They also considered that the current access arrangements off Low Road are simple priority junctions, and that the introduction of a roundabout would not be consistent with the access strategy, and it's not considered good practice to vary the types of junctions along a relatively short link of road. So Highways are of the view that the what was proposed by the applicant is the most desirable strategy, and no objection is raised subject to the conditions set out in the report. So therefore the access arrangement has not been amended from what you previously saw last time. So in terms of the landscaping, this is the landscape master plan. As I said, it is outline only, but it is proposed to condition that the development is carried out broadly in accordance with this plan. So it shows adequate landscaping for the development and the provision of acceptable open space within the middle of the site. So this shows details of the southern access and the emergency junction. So this is the access point which obtains the required visibility, and the emergency access junction which will have bollards to prevent it from everyday use. And this is the northern access, again with adequate visibility, which Highways have no objection to. These are just some photos to remind members, although they would have visited the site. That's the view along Dean's Lane. That's the view of new planting which has taken place, and you'll see the rear of the properties in Oakley Road, and that photograph's taken from Dean's Lane. It's a view south down Dean's Lane, and that's Low Road looking at the northern entrance position. And northeast corner of the site, and north at the southern entrance position, so looking in the opposite direction. Again, it's another view. It's the southern boundary of the site, southeast corner of the site, and again the southern boundary. So you can see it's an arable field currently. and that shows the rear of the properties in Oakley Road. So it just gives you a reminder of the character of the area. So in terms of the reasons it was deferred, I said all highway responses have been, all consultation responses have been received. Highways raised no objection subject to the conditions, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission can find no record of Commonwealth graves or burials from the First or Second World War within the site. Therefore, the recommendation is for approval, subject to the legal agreement and conditions set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, councillors, in this particular case, those that can debate and vote on, your thoughts, please. Whilst you're thinking about it, I'm sorry that county, my views are that county are definitely against the roundabouts, and the locals in the estate opposite were actually hoping that they might get something, weren't they, to slow the traffic down on that particular road. But you've heard county's comments. The dots in the middle of the road, roundabouts, for want of a better title, seem to be losing favour these days, so they don't want anything. Right, your views.
Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I'm still concerned about that traffic going down that bend. When we were there, it was very fast. And really echoing what you say there. And I need some guidance, really, from officers or maybe the legal officer. My understanding is that while highways give material consideration advice, they are not the determiner of this application. And if we decide, as a committee, that we think it would be more efficacious to put in a roundabout, then we are at liberty to do that, even against their advice. So I would like some advice from the officers about whether legally that is the case or not, and just keep to the legal part of it, not the other side of it.
Right. On the legal side, I'm going to ask the solicitor on the legal side, and then I'll ask the planning officers for their views.
Summarising from what you said at the beginning, yes, obviously you are the determining body for the application, but I think the planners will probably want to give a bit of guidance, because what is proposed is obviously the planning application. You're determining the planning application in front of you, so to change the highways arrangement is changing the planning application itself. And normally we wouldn't look to do that. You determine the planning application as is. So you either refuse it because of highway grounds, you're not happy with the highway arrangement, or you defer it, which you've obviously already done, and we've got the answers from that, or you approve it based on what's there. So, or you can add conditions. Obviously, there is significant conditions already added by highways on the arrangement that's there at the moment. So I think the planners will probably want to give a bit of guidance about what they think about the idea of changing it altogether.
Right, yes, please.
Yeah, so really just to echo what Charlotte said, in terms of the application, it does not include a roundabout, so we've got no mechanism to require them to put a roundabout in, because we'd need to demonstrate that it could be on highway land for us to put a condition on, and we haven't got that evidence at this time. So I think, the option is, as Charlotte mentioned, to refuse the application as is if highways is considered to be an issue.
So does that mean, therefore, that we cannot add a condition requiring a roundabout, but highways could?
Well, it's not as straightforward as just us saying, put a roundabout in. If highways, when highways put conditions on to require works to be done to the existing highway network, it is generally subject to some preliminary safety audit to ensure that that is a safe and reasonable method. So at this stage, none of that has gone been undertaken in terms of a roundabout as it's not been proposed. So highways don't just put conditions on without doing some kind of preliminary work to find out that it's safe.
So basically what you're saying is that they have the capability to put on a condition such as that, but we don't because we haven't got the knowledge behind us, but yet we're the determining authority.
I suppose it's not... I suppose what they have is a report that's normally produced by the applicant to say this is what they want to do. So they've had a report that's looked. It's not necessarily based purely on their knowledge. There's been a report done to look at that as a solution. And what I'm saying is, in this case, we haven't had a report that looks at the provision of a roundabout, whether it's achievable, whether it raises any highway safety concerns. So at this time, my view is that you haven't got the information available to you to enable a condition to be put on.
Yeah.
Chair, if I could just add to that, I think, and in any case, picking up a point that Charlotte made, in this, if it was an outline with all matters reserved, committee would sort of be free to put conditions on, if you like, relating to different aspects, if they had the technical information to back up that decision. But in this case, the one matter that you've got in front of you in detail is access. And I think what you're suggesting is actually putting on a condition which is directly in conflict with what's being proposed. So they're asking you to determine the access arrangements, as Suzanne described, with priority T junctions. You can't change their proposal sort of fundamentally by condition. I think you're back to, if you're not satisfied it's a proper highway arrangement, you'd have to refuse planning permission.
Thank you for that. Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. I can see where Councillor Everett's coming from with regard to the roundabouts, because it would be an automatic traffic calming measure. And like you say, when we were on our site visit, it wasn't the safest road to be on, and it is renowned for speeding vehicles. So I have concerns about the traffic that's going to be coming out is going to increase traffic on that road, and it's not a disaster waiting to happen, but I feel there should be some sort of measure. I know we probably can't do it, that influences highways to ask for some sort of traffic calming measures somewhere that are paid for by the developer. That's just one point. And with regard to the war graves, I don't think the comment that was made by one of the gentlemen that objected when we first heard this, I don't think it mentioned the period of where these war graves were from, but I'd just like to make the comment that Commonwealth war graves only look after war graves between 1914 and 1921 and 1939 and 1947. Anything post 1947 is the Ministry of Defence. Anything pre that is anybody's guess. But that's just a comment I'd like to make. Thank you.
Councillor Heaney?
And then Liz Benson. Looking at that master plan, the planting master plan or the landscape master plan, there's no planting along the top between the houses, or the row of houses, and the new houses, and I think that there should be at least some planting there. The houses go right up, and it looks to me as though they're the side of the houses, so they're going to be the houses are going to be right on the back of the gardens there. And I would expect to see trees, shrubs and everything put in there. And I'd like to have an informative, if people agree with me, to that, you know, for when it comes back again to the committee.
All right. Your thoughts
if
on
it goes
that?
ahead, if it goes ahead.
Yeah. Your thoughts on that? And we're talking about the houses in Oakley Road.
Yeah, the ones
right
along the top. You can just see them on the
top
top there.
Yeah.
It's just the north side of this. There's no planting whatsoever.
Right. Councillor Benison.
Sorry. See it. I'll put it up a bit.
Thank you, Chairman. We were talking about highways issues and the fact that investigations haven't been carried about speeding motorists, but the Harrington District Speedwatch Partnership according to our notes here, have made 12 visits to Low Road in March, and 180 speeding motorists were recorded. And on one day, between 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening, 54 motorists were exceeding 36 miles an hour. So there is a case for... the Speedwatch Partnership would have the cameras to record that. That is a legitimate survey of that particular area, I would have thought.
Yes, it certainly is. Yes, Councillor. Councillor Morris?
Just waiting for my fellow councillors to switch our microphone off, Chair. Must be patient. We were talking about safety audits. One hasn't been carried out. How does one go about asking if a safety audit could be carried out? Although I do rather like your map there, it's rather pretty, in no way does it reflect the reality of what that road looks like and what we witnessed when we stood there. 11 cars passed us, and each one of them on that bend, when in emerging traffic coming out of whatever splay you put there, could not have been able to stop in an emergency. They were on it and gone. So I'm just wondering how we will cover that, please.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Head of Planning if, with the evidence now that we've got from the Harwich Safety Partnership, plus our own experience, does this not call for something further than just a request?
In terms of the information, obviously, what the speed and the traffic surveys that were carried out are in the report, and they're evidence for you to balance up in terms of the consideration of the application. I mean, the information that we've got and Highways view is what is proposed is acceptable. If members have a different view to that, then your option is to refuse the application. For the reasons that we've said previously, as in if you're looking at roundabouts, then they haven't been included as part of this application and don't form part of the consideration.
I think from what I'm... Yes, Councillor Everett.
I know we've deferred this once, but surely there is another option, and that is to go back to the developer and say that our preference is that some form of traffic calming, i.e. a 3-arm roundabout or 4-arm roundabout, should be considered. That would be a legitimate thing for us to do, because then it's putting it into the developer's court as to whether they want to do that or not.
Yes, Susan?
I mean, in terms of that approach, the application has been deferred previously, and it was a consideration that has been taken to Highways about the provision of a roundabout. And Highways have quite clearly come back and said that it is unacceptable. I mean, if we were to go back to the applicant and say, do you want to provide a roundabout, we're then going to attract an objection from Highways. So, yeah.
I mean, they have said that a 4-arm roundabout would be unacceptable. They have said that a 3-arm roundabout would perform poorly. That's different. It may not actually be, therefore, their view that it would be unacceptable. It might perform poorly, but actually we can think of lots of roundabouts that perform poorly. I can think of lots of things that perform poorly. And it might well be that there is a case there to say to the applicant, would you consider this?
Right.
Maurice Alexander. After.
Yes, Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I'm harping on again about this splay and merging into the road. There are many forms of traffic calming. I'm not altogether sure a roundabout is the answer. So I don't disagree with my colleague, but at the same token, there are other forms of slowing the traffic down. If you bring up the other foil that you have there of the actual road itself, please. You had no, nearly there.
The photo?
No, it was the road. We actually saw the road with the trees on one side.
That one.
That's the top end, yes, and that's the south end, southern end of Low Road we wanted to see. Surely, I'm a little confused as to how we, as your authorising authority, have no authority to authorise, simply because a consultee, in effect, has told us that there's no need to have this. Now, although I go along wholly with what my peers at county would instruct us to believe, I don't altogether agree with what they're saying. And as for refusal, I think that is a bit draconian. I think that we need to build properties, and developers need to feel that they are comfortable in our tendering home to do such things on our behalf, and I welcome them with open arms. But this is a sticking point, and until we resolve this sticking point, I can see that we're not going anywhere very quickly. So can we either get a safety audit, is that possible? I'll ask that question again if I may. And or is there any alternatives of traffic calming rather than roundabouts?
Yes, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking at, obviously, the conditions that Highways wanted that are in, we're actually on top of page 12 in bold. The first two says detailed specification and design of junction to be submitted and agreed. Well, obviously, that will be between the developer, County Council, Highways and our planners. So if we were minded to approve this, can we influence what that detailed specification and design of junction could be, as in putting our concerns forward so they are considered when that plan is put in? Thank you.
Yes, as far as I'm concerned, I think the objections are not necessarily on the site, but it is purely the safety of this particular road, and that might be, I would think, reading that suggestion, might be one way out of it. So that I know this particular outline is purely and simply to consider the exits and the entrances onto the site, but we are seriously worried that here is a chance to improve that bit of road as well. And if we can come up with a set of words that the actual position of the entrances and the exits are agreed, however, we are worried on the form that it actually takes the road, i.e. should it be a roundabout or traffic calming, and then that might be one way out of it, I would have thought. Morris, your microphone.
Sorry, just to provide some clarification on what is meant by that condition, that is the finer details of the access. So what you're being asked to consider is if the access is acceptable, like are shown. So that would be the finer details. So we then can't go back to them if the application is approved and say, no, we don't want that access, we want it completely different. It's just the finer details in terms of which are to be agreed.
I take your point. Yes, Councillor Baker, and then I'll come to...
Thank you, Chairman. But we're looking at the safety of the people that are going to potentially live on the west side of Low Road. I know there are some crossing points, but surely the design of that junction doesn't just include the junction that comes out of it must include the whole part of the junction. So the effect it has on the rest of the road, if you like. So surely considering or putting in informative or some sort of concern that we have that there should be some sort of safe crossing point near to those junctions, as in a pedestrian refuge in the middle of the road, that will have a calming effect on potential traffic and make it safer. I think that my colleagues have obviously got concerns that it's not going to be safe, regardless of what highways say.
Councillor Alexander, come back.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would come back again, indeed for the third time, and I'll, if I may, ask the same question as I asked last time. We're talking about the safety audit. Is there any way that a safety audit can be achieved? And are there any other traffic calming measures, such as Councillor Baker mentioned, that we could ask to be put in place? If not?
In terms of the safety audit, if the applicants were willing to consider the provision of or changes to alterations, then they would need to do a safety audit in terms of that. That's not something that the council or Essex County Council would do on that behalf. They're of the view that what information that's been provided is acceptable, and therefore it's safe. I mean, in terms of any other traffic calming measures, I don't know. I mean, there could be something, but that would be for further discussion, and we have got a recommendation from Highways that say that they have no objection. Yeah, that's where we are really. It's sort of what is...
May I come back, Chair?
Yes, please.
Going off the beaten track here slightly, but pertinent to what we're talking about, we underwent training a little while ago, and we were taken out on the site visit. And when we arrived there, we were all taken to the other side of the road and asked, what do you think of the entrance of this? Well, we didn't answer very much. And they said, well, do you not think it's incorrect? And we were given a briefing of how design, in our minds, would be right for Tendring District Council and for the residents who live in Tendring Peninsula. Now, I was quite taken back by the amount of input that he gave to us in respect of how we control the design. So how can we possibly be an authorising authority if we have no one here to justify how they came to this idea that the road was perfectly safe and it was okay to go ahead and to build a large entrance on almost a blind bend. So therefore, I don't see us as an authorising authority at all, but we are playing second fiddle to our peers in County Council. Highways Department.
Right, I think we've had quite a discussion on this one. I think we ought to tidy it up now. From what I'm gathering, the answer would be to refuse it. Or, and I don't like doing it, I don't like deferring it a second time, but if you refuse it with these reasons that we are not happy with the interests of safety, those roads coming straight out onto that fast road, and take it at that point. I don't think we can gain much more by throwing it about tonight, so we've got to make our minds up which way we want to go.
Particularly the southern access too, I think.
Yes. Right, Councillor.
In that light, I propose that we defer this application for further discussion with the applicants on the safety of the road and how it might be ameliorated.
Right. Ask the officer just to comment on that, but otherwise I'm going to put it to the vote. So,
Yeah, we can go back on those bases.
Right. Okay. In that case, I'm putting it to you exactly as Councillor Everett put it to us, that we defer it with this in mind? Those in favour, please show. 1, 2.
I prefer to refuse it, actually, but...
And those against, please show.
I don't know. Sorry. Was Rosemary voting?
I was voting to defer it.
To defer. Okay.
I prefer to refuse
Well, I'm taking the vote on this. Now you... Actually, on that vote, it is deferred because we had 4 in favour of deferment and nobody showed to vote against.
5 in favour and none against.
Right, and 1 abstain. Yep. Yep. And if you abstain, that doesn't count. So in that case, it will be deferred. Simple as that.
I would prefer to refuse it because I think they'll go straight to appeal. But anyway,
Yes.
I should have been quicker on them off the mark by putting it in. Yeah, I'm going to go too. So it's all right.
Right.
I'll be gone for 2. Somebody can come and get me.
Right, we'll make a start again onto A2, which is land to the south of Long Road and to the west of Clacton Road, Mistley. Again, it's an item that we've been on the visit and we've also had public speaking on it. So straight turn to Mr. Norse.
Chairman, thank you. As the Chairman just mentioned, this is a deferred item. There were 2 key issues, I think, in terms of members' minds when they last considered this in relation to potentially looking to reduce the scale of dwellings on the periphery of the site and also to look at the possibility of getting a retail unit somewhere within the site once the site was completed. So that's what officers have been working on. But let's just go through the application. It's a Phase 1 reserved matters application, which includes access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, for 96 residential dwellings, following outline planning permission 15-00761 out. And it's land at south of Long Road and to the west of Clacton Road, Mistley. So again, members are very familiar with the site. You have an existing, or there'll be a main access from Long Road to the north and from Clacton Road to the east of the site. To the west of the site, members will be aware there's already an outline application for another residential development as well. So that's the application site itself. In effect, the boundary runs around the lighter shade of land as shown. As I mentioned, from Long Road and from Clacton Road will be the actual site accesses. So the principal development has been accepted. We're now looking at the detailed matters. That's the northern edge of the site, looking along towards the east of Long Road. That's looking across the site from Clacton Road, looking in a westerly direction, and further to the southwest across the site. So this is the area of land we're looking at. So this is the only matters for consideration are the detail of this layout and design. I'll go into a more detailed picture of that. In fact, I'll go back one. As members will be aware, as part of the scheme, there's a detailed or landscape scheme which will will include part of the land to the north and also to the east of the site. So there will be a significant buffer of landscaping being proposed for those areas. I mentioned the access point from Long Road. That's already been approved under the outline application, so that's not for consideration tonight. What is for consideration is the access from Clacton Road. Let's just look at more detail. So this is the detail layout of the 96 dwellings now before you for consideration. As I mentioned, one of the key concerns of members was perhaps to look at reducing the scale of dwellings on the periphery of the site, I think in particular perhaps to the north and to the east of the site. Officers have gone back to the applicant, and the applicant has agreed to reduce the scale of dwellings to the east side of the site, so at the site entrance from Clacton Road, with a terrace of bungalows and a pair of semi-detached bungalows at this point. That property is reduced from two-storey dwelling down to a 1.5-storey, as are that dwelling and that dwelling. I think for commercial viability reasons, the applicant has not been prepared to go beyond that in terms of reducing the overall scale. I think the question tonight is whether the applicant's gone far enough in that respect. That was the parameter plan that members approved again at the previous meeting on the 6th of the month. The current scheme before you tonight forms phase 1 of a 3-phase development. So the second phase will obviously be the central part of the site, then the third phase will be further to the south. This is the section through the site, giving the sort of general appearance of the site. I think generally there's a good mix of housing being put forward. In the centre of the site is what will be the apartment building. Part of this will actually part of the ground floor will form an approved A2 office use at present. That's the area that would eventually become the A1 use. And the second elevational drawing is looking towards the east, in effect. So that's the apartment block, which at 2.5 stories is the highest part of the site. The remainder would be generally 2-storey in height. So just going through the details, mix of styles and different types of housing. You've got detached, you've got terraced, you've got use of render, use of brickwork. I'll just run through those quickly with you. You have seen these ones before. We'll come to the bungalows in a minute. So that's the revised 1.5-storey dwellings that I referred to you earlier. So there is a reduction in height. They're approximately 7.2 metres to the highest point, so they are lower than a normal 2-storey. That's the bungalow designs, again, which have been put in. And again, they have there is some reasonable detail within those. And that's the longer terrace of bungalows. And then that's the apartment block. Mentioned the requirement to potentially have this as an A1 use. It's the applicant's intention to use this as the sales office for the site and for the whole development, not just for this phase. The proposal is at the end of final occupation of the development, so that's at the end of all 3 phases, under permitted development rights, this would revert to an A1 use, and at that point it would become a retail unit. Now, the applicants agree that that can be covered by condition, and again, that's within your papers this evening. So we would secure that via condition at the end of the development. I think there was some thought about whether it could be done as part of this phase. I think for commercial viability reasons, you're unlikely to get a retailer coming forward to use the site with only just the first phase of the development. I think that's far more likely at completion of the full development, but again, that's open for debate. These are just some of the garage designs. Again, the whole scheme is reasonably sort of traditional in nature in terms of what's in there, and it's sort of fully reflective of the locality. That's the access from Clacton Road. There won't be a right-hand turn in, it's simply a turn into the site. I think members will recall from the previous discussion, it will only form part of the site. It's not going to be a through road from that point, so there'll be a limited usage to the initial part of the site, if you like. So, like I said, there isn't a right turn into that, whereas there is from the long road access. So that's it, Chairman. The recommendation is to approve at present. Like I said, the 2 key issues were the scale of the dwellings to the periphery and the use of the A2 unit for an A1 use. Thank you.
Right. Again, Councillor, there's no speaking on it. I'll start the questioning. The phase 1, as we're talking about, how many people, when phase 1 is finished, how many houses will be in occupation in phase 1?
It'll be 96, Chairman. So
that then makes me disappointed that there'll be 96 properties where the nearest shop will be a mile and a half, possibly. and I can see why the developers don't want it to build it when there's two houses on there. That makes sense. But when you've got the end of phase one, you'll have 96 properties, and what they're saying, as I understand it, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that's still going to be a sales area right through stage 1, 2, 3 and 4. So it's going to have more than 96 properties without a shop on the site, and that disappoints me. Right, any further points, and then I'll ask Graham to comment on that one. Yes, Councillor. Yes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I brought up this retail site at the last meeting, I think. Can you tell me where first of all, where it's going to be?
It's just there.
Okay.
So it forms part of the main apartment block.
Okay. I don't know whether anyone is acquainted with the one at Brooklands Elm, where there's a Sainsbury's, a miniature Sainsbury's and a fish and chip shop.
Yes.
That is on the periphery of the boundaries, which not only entices the estate to use it, but also passing trade. It has enticed me in there in the past, not very often, but it has enticed me in there. I would have thought the site perhaps could be sited where trade could be brought in from outside, or passing trade right from the word go. And like you, I think, how many houses are there going to be after 4 phases?
300 in total.
And that's going to take quite a while, isn't it? Approximately?
It depends on the developer, but it could easily be 5 years.
Yeah, it's a long time. Okay, that's my point. Anyway, thank you.
Right. Yes, Councillor Alexander, are you indicating?
No.
Right.
Now you've said it, I thought it's popped into my mind. I have to concur with you, Chair, and Councillor Brown. My knowledge of this, that if you want to walk into the town, it's straight down a very steep hill. And I do this by experience of many, many leaflet drops. And they are killers, these hills. Not everybody has 2 or 3 cars in the circle. Some people, younger people, may have 1 car which is used for work, and they are reliant on walking up and down that hill to go shopping. There is a minimal amount of shops down below in the village itself. I think there's a co-op and various other things. So I'm going to agree with Councillor Brown on this, that we need to look at this a bit more carefully before we move on, because I think a retail unit would be a huge advantage to them and to the surrounding district, because other people who live there will have the same problem. They've got to walk down the hill as well.
Yes. Councillor Everett?
Thank you. Like others, I have the same concern. However, I'm a bit more of a pragmatist. And if we can get the location there and the developer is happy with it going there, then I, for one, would accept that. Perhaps not perfect, but at least it is a stab in the right direction. However, I would want to add a condition that said that once the first phase was done, that was put in place. Because I don't think it's acceptable to wait for the 4th phase before that were actually brought about. And my guess is that a condition could be very easily crafted around that to make that a reality before any 2nd phase development took place.
Right. Yes, come on. Yes.
Do you have this unit, which will eventually become A1 use, do you have a slide to show the actual outline of that, or what it's going to look like when it's finished? Architecturally, please.
Yeah, I think we do.
Let's have a look at
It's
it.
sort of L-shaped, isn't it, in plan?
Yeah, there we go. So it's in...
That's it.
And how many stories is that over?
That's just a single story. So
Single story.
In effect, it's that area there.
Yeah. Excellent. So,
I mean, just for, I think it's 196 square metres was the size of it, which certainly for a decent size newsagent type store, it's probably acceptable.
Yeah. So it is a small building of little or no financial value except for someone who's using it as a retail use. So why can they not put that into the next phase and leave this one into A1 use when they have completed phase 1?
Chairman, I think that it comes back to what I said at the start. And again, I'm not an expert on retail units and what it takes to make them viable, but that would be my concern, that you wouldn't have a taker for it because of the fact it's within a development site and you'd be serving a relatively small number of people. But I'm saying that as a non-commercial expert, if you like. That's my concern, but I'm hearing what members are saying. I think you could certainly put a condition on requiring that that it's put in place at the end of occupation of the first phase. You could certainly have a condition which would say that. But it's whether it's reasonable to do that in terms of the viability of the building. That's my concern.
I think perhaps Councillor Everett's idea is right. It would be wrong to say right from day one, but at the end, at least at the end of phase 1 with 96 properties there, it would justify a little store of some description. Now, the rest of the proposals, the reducing height, etc., have been done, and would you be satisfied with those now? It is purely this question of having to wait for the shop until the complete site is finished that I think we're arguing about. So I'm going to ask Mr. Norse whether we think we can somehow modify that condition, which initially we said went from A1 retail on the cessation of A2, if we can word that somehow to mean at the end of phase 1.
Yeah, Chairman, I think it could be. I think we can certainly have it that it's that on the final occupation of or completion of the first phase, that that unit. Don't forget, it's slightly complex. That needs to be occupied as the A2 use in the first instance, and it would be as the sales office. Once that is commenced and in use, it then has permitted development rights to A1, so that would trigger that. But we can certainly put a condition on saying that at the end of certainly occupation of the end of completion of the first phase, that would then revert to A1 use. Yes. So that can certainly be done. And obviously the applicant has the option to come back with an application to vary that condition if they wish and cannot fill that property or fill that requirement. So yes, it can be done is the answer.
Right. With that in mind, can I ask if we have a proposal to set that up? And then we have a proposer and a seconder. So you know what we're going to ask. And it will give the applicant, if they undoubtedly will want to challenge it, but there we are, it gets on for us. Yes, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I mean, there would be a second possibility. I mean, I doubt whether, like it's already been said, that someone would take it on with only 96 dwellings, and I don't think it would be financially viable. Perhaps a compromise to the end of the second session of building.
Yes. I'm minded, you brought it up, the Blore estate, where it was the completion of the site before that little shop opened, and it's now a thriving shop because of the number of people that know it's there. Certainly from my own village, save going into Clacton for a supermarket, we've got one on the scene, and it's very vital.
You can see it from the main road.
You can.
It's not on the main road, but it's visible and advertised.
Yes. Right. Yes, Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Chairman. We're not just talking about these 96 units that are being built. there are a lot of houses at the top end there on that ribbon development that I'm sure, as I go into the Sainsbury's, little Sainsbury's on the Bloor estate, for convenience, because it's easy to park, it would be easy to park there, so it will attract people from houses on Long Road who would walk there, or people further afield that would drive there, or would pop in there on their way past the estate.
Yes, yes.
Chairman, perhaps if I was just going to add just one thing. Obviously, before us tonight is the Phase 1 application. That's the one we're looking at tonight.
Yes.
So I think if we're going to attach a condition, it should be to the application before us, rather than a further phase, which, for all we may never come forward. So I think we perhaps ought to go, if we're going to put the condition on, do it for the first phase, and then the applicant does have the right to vary that at some later stage of the wish.
Yes, yeah. So we want a suitable set of words, but I know I've got a proposer and a seconder that that's the intention that we have, that after the completion of Phase 1, there should be an A1 retail use on that particular site. Yeah, that's... So you know what you're voting for now. Those in favour, please show. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. So that is approved to grant the Head of Planning on Phase 1 reserve matters. Thank you. And now we go to Ardleigh, and that will certainly bring back at least one of the councillors. Councillor Baker, I know, will be able to speak on that one. Right, now this item is the Crown Business Centre, Old Ipswich Road, Ardleigh, where again it's a deferred item. It's application 17022204. This was a full application and we deferred it because of a rather nice looking oak tree, you will remember. Right, and Mr. North again.
Chairman, thank you. Yep, it's, I think, due to the nature of the tree, the application has been reduced from 91 units to the construction of 77 small B1 and B8 use commercial units with ancillary facilities, associated car parking, landscaping, and the construction of 5 commercial office blocks with B1 use associated with associated car parking and landscaping. So there's an amended description on that one. So this is the application site itself, so members are very familiar with this. It's on Old Ipswich Road, which, as we know, joins the main A12. And you have the public house just to the southwest of the site. That's looking at the... And the trees in question very much form that line of trees across the centre of the site, running sort of north to south. I think, as it mentioned in the report, it was potentially a fill boundary at one point, but they are very substantial trees and have a significant presence within the site. I think that's probably the tree in question that members were concerned about, looking through the site. There's an existing commercial development further to the south, which doesn't form part of this site. That does have permission for a redevelopment for some housing units. That's just looking to the northeast of the site, looking at the tree cover there. And just a few more photographs of the site itself. I think that really does demonstrate the nature of the trees we're talking about. And that's Ipswich Road. That's the previously approved scheme on this site. As you'll note from your report, normally this site being well outside the settlement boundary, we wouldn't perhaps consider it for this particular use. But as we know, there has been an approval for a hotel and existing commercial units on the site already. So the principle of this use has already been established. And as I mentioned, that's the site for the 4 dwellings to the south. That's just another aerial view of the site. You've got the reservoir further to the east. So that was the original site plan, and the tree in question was in this location here. And that's now the revised scheme. So the applicant has quite cleverly simply removed the central part of those units and just reduced some freestanding buildings either side of the tree. That ensures that that line of trees is retained in place, which I think is the key thing that members were looking for. So again, that's just simply the first floor plans. And again, just the details, mainly sort of contemporary style buildings in sort of plastic coated finishes on the outside. You've got what's known as the Hudson office block, which is a more sort of open plan style of office block. These are two-storey in nature. I think the parish council were concerned that they were three-storey. They're not. They're just two-storey. That's just more details. The tree is still there. It's slightly disappeared on that one, but it is definitely still there. And that's just looking at the end of the buildings. And just the overall site view itself. And again, you can see the tree is being retained within that scheme. So the conclusion, Jim, is that the tree will now be retained, and the recommendation is to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you again. This is one we've had free talking on. So, yes, Councillor Holmes.
Yeah. Can you take the pictures back to where it first started? Keep going. Keep going. Yeah. Stop.
Yeah.
Outline scheme approved for hotel. There is no more hotel on that site.
No, this was simply a planning application, so it was never built.
No, but surely it's approved for a hotel and there ain't one. So shouldn't that be changed? I mean, shouldn't that just be put for B1 units without the hotel in it if we're not going to get a hotel?
No, just to explain, this was the previous approved plan, so these are for a completely separate application. So it's nothing to do with the current scheme, if you like. It was simply showing members what's already been approved on the site. So that's got a permission already.
Yeah, but we gave permission for a hotel, and now there isn't one.
But that still sits there as a separate permission. So we still have to acknowledge that there is a permission in place. You're right, if the current scheme goes ahead, this scheme will completely fall by the wayside. But it's simply for members' information that this is what has been approved in the past on the site. So it's likely that the scheme that's been approved will be superseded and disappear. But it's the current scheme we're now looking at.
Yeah. Yes, Councillor Fowler.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I welcome the change in the plans to take provision for the magnificent oak tree, because I think it would have been such a terrible shame to have lost that. And actually being there that day, I'm sure that colleagues that were also there that day would agree that actually seeing that tree there would be such a terrible shame to lose it. So I'm very pleased that the applicant has worked with planning officers to agree the changes to this application, and I will certainly be supporting it. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Alexander.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think the developer has more than met what we wanted, and I'm really impressed with doing so, just to show you that it can work if people listen. Fine, so I'm quite happy to move this as laid out in the agenda, and well done to all involved. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Fowler.
And I'll be happy to second that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? None. In that case, I put it straight to the vote that we do approve it with the conditions 1 to 23 on page 55. Those in favour, please show. And those against?
I'm going to abstain.
John's right. Right, so that is approved. Thank you very much. Oh, dear me. Ah. Right, we're now on application A4. For those of you who've got agendas, it's on page 69. It's a planning application for a property at between 42 and 46 Brooklands Gardens, Jaywick. It's planning application 17/01845, and this is a full application. Alison, welcome.
Thank you. Can I just refer you to the update sheet first, please? You'll see reason for refusal 3 in the committee report is that the absence of an ecological assessment, which has been provided since the report was written. It's summarised there on your sheet, and it doesn't raise any issues that couldn't be addressed by condition, so that's resulted in reason for refusal number 3 being removed from the recommendation. The applicants also provided a number of aerial photographs which basically refer back to the habitat survey that says that a lot of the site is hard standing underneath all that overgrowth. And the fourth point is an error in the report in relation to the height of the second storey, which is 8.3 metres, not 8.5 metres, as stated at a few points there. So the application's for full planning permission for a 4-storey block, 7 flats with parking underneath. You'll have seen from the site visit there's the remains of one property on the site, but there were previously 2 on there. It's very overgrown. The site lies within the settlement development boundary for Jaywick, flood zone 3A, which is the highest risk, and it's within the urban regeneration area. It's been referred to committee by officers due to the council's top long-term objective of regenerating Jaywick and encouraging redevelopment, but unfortunately the scale and close proximity to neighbouring dwellings proposed here would result in serious harm to visual and residential amenity, so cannot be supported by officers. This just shows you an aerial view of the site with the remains of the property here, and these are the confines of the site with neighbouring bungalows on Bentley Avenue. This shows you the immediate neighbour to the left, which is a very small bungalow, and the site here in the middle is the whole confines of the overgrowth with the other neighbour here. You can see one of the properties on Bentley Avenue at the back, and the small bungalow is lost here, but this is the other neighbour, which is a tall bungalow. And this is the open space with the community centre and the neighbour opposite, which is that one on the corner. So you can see the overall character of the areas of raised bungalows. A lot of them have been gradually replaced to overcome the flood risk issues by raising them. These are the properties to the rear. So you've got immediately backing on, you've got number 47 Bentley Avenue, and then 43, 41. They're just bungalows, again slightly raised. And this is the immediate neighbour, so the proposal would be in here. So this shows you the proposed block plan. So at ground floor, it fills the whole width of the site, with the upper floors overhang, not to this full extent, but that's some paving, and then all this area is amenity space. So this shows you the proposal. It's 4 stories maximum, with the third story stepped in around a terrace, and you've also got balconies to either side at first floor. The ground floor is totally parking, cycle parking, bin stores to overcome the flood risk issue. You'll see in the report that the neighbours are incorrectly drawn. The scale of this one is basically correct, but this should be that very small neighbour, which is actually quite a bit closer to the boundary. And this photo shows you the difference in scale there. It's very low. So, it'd be about this kind of height probably, and closer than is shown on here. So the overall height is 11 metres. It's 18.2 metres wide, and then steps in at the back to 15.2 metres wide, and to the top of this second floor is 8.3 metres. This shows you the parking you've got at the bottom. You've got e-charging points, and then cycle parking and bin stores, and this is all amenity space. And these are the floor plans. You've got private balconies to both sides here at the first floor, and then the top flat has this large terrace. In terms of separation, you've only got 4 metres separation to those bungalows to the rear. This is the back of their rear gardens, and they've only got 4 metres basically before you hit the rear wall of their bungalows. And you've got 1.3 metres to the two neighbours here above ground floor. At ground floor, they run straight to the sides of the site. So the recommendation is refusal on visual and residential amenity grounds. The proposal is just considered to be too tall and too bulky for that location with so many near neighbours of such low height. There's obviously a strong desire to promote redevelopment in Jaywick. We've approved a lot of 3-storey developments locally, but this, in the officer's opinion, just takes it too far. It's just too tall and too bulky to be supported. So it's recommended for refusal, but reason 3 is removed through the submission of the Habitat Survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we get to public speaking. I don't have a member of the public in favour or against. It's not a parished area. In that case, we have got the ward councillor, Councillor Raby. So if he'd like to come forward and take his 5 minutes, and I stress his 5 minutes.
Right, well, good evening, fellow councillors. As you know, I am the ward councillor for this ward, for this area. I was at the site visit this morning. I'm speaking on behalf of Kevin because he's not here tonight, okay. He's in favour of this, and so am I, of this application. This came before us yesterday on the CCT, which is the Coast Community Team. And it was outlined there and then about the height of this, that there was going to be a confusion over it. But I look at it like this. The roads have been done up there, everything's been done, and if we start refusing applications like this going through, right, okay, then we're going to get nowhere with the developers coming into this area to try and develop this area and get this out of deprivation, because that's what we are talking about here. Deprivation. Now, I've looked at the plan this morning, and that top floor does not overlook the road. It's been designed to lay back, so it's not overlooking the road. So I don't know where you're getting this from at the end of the day, because that is what it's been designed to do. I think the building myself is quite adequate. I think it looks very nice. And don't forget, there is another one application coming up by the same developer. He's got another one in what's name. He wants to try this out to see what it's going to be look like at the end of the day. And I think that by refusing this, you're going to put a precedent on any other developer that comes into this area, because this is what we are trying to do. This is what the CCT was set up to do at the end of the day. We had a long discussion about this yesterday at the end of the day, and that is all I've got to say.
Right, thank you very much. Now the next councillor is the portfolio holder for housing, and I've just checked on my rules, and he only gets 3 minutes. So welcome, Councillor Honeywood.
Luckily, I wrote this quite quickly. Thank you, Chairman. As you will be aware, the housing in Jaywick Sands is predominantly comprised of single-storey individual properties originally built as holiday accommodation. All are susceptible to coastal flooding, and many would be completely covered by water in the event of a flood. Anything that is built within the current settlement is going to be both out of keeping with what is currently there and, more importantly, safer. As community leaders, we owe it to the current and future residents to not only directly provide, but more importantly, facilitate an environment where others help us to make residents safe. A task that is made much harder in an area where I'm told the normal build-to-sell financial situation does not currently apply. Whilst I completely accept that this development is not in keeping with what is currently there, I think it is important to remember that this council has already given planning permission to other developments, some which are only tens of metres away from this site, which were not in keeping with what is currently there. In the words of the previous planning development manager, thank God they aren't in keeping with what is currently there. In addition, given what is currently on the site, a burnt out, partial shell, it is difficult to understand the comment that in this application, quote, fails to make a positive contribution to the quality of the local environment, unquote. Quite frankly, I think that the proposed new build would make a positive contribution to this long abandoned site. As I have previously stated, anything on this site is going to be significantly out of scale with what is already there, as the main living accommodation needs to be above flood level. I am sure that the committee will be well aware of how difficult it was to persuade residents to leave during the last two tidal surges, with many deciding to risk their own safety and that of emergency service workers rather than leave. Ironically, it is my view that the scale and height will make existing residents all the more aware of how long overdue more flood-resilient housing is in Jaywick Sands. I completely accept that in an ideal world, we will want to prevent neighbouring homes from being overlooked or overshadowed. But we do not live in an ideal world, where we have a developer who wants to assist our plans to make residents safer. I do feel that it is incumbent on us to provide positive support to facilitate that safety drive rather than stand back and leave Jaywick Sands to the fate of the North Sea. Because we arbitrarily decide, as non-residents, that this will be a detrimental development. It is somewhat ironic that the very residents who officers have deemed will be significantly impacted have chosen not to voice their concerns. Perhaps they don't see this as a detriment, but more of a step towards a safer, more prosperous and rejuvenated Jaywick Sands. The council has had the courage to say it's going to turn Jaywick Sands around, a task that, if it were easy, would have been undertaken years ago. But this council's willingness to think outside the box means Jaywick Sands is now on the up. Never a week seems to go by without my hearing of increased interest in the area and investors wanting to know more about how they can get involved.
Can you wind up?
Yes, one line or one paragraph left. I believe that approving this application tonight will send a further message that we are committed to Jaywick Sands and we are a council that can be worked with. I cannot say the same for flat refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now, we don't have any more speakers, so councillors, I don't know whether I'll ask the planning officer if she wishes to add anything. No?
Mr Holmes and then Morris. Alexander.
Right. Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, it looks obscene. Sorry. I know we need to build Jaywick up. We've been doing it for the last 100 years, I suppose. Take the top one off and I've got no problem. But that just looks obscene. That just looks completely out of character. And I'm going to say this. You have a party at the top flat and you throw anything you want over. God help the people down below in these bungalows on either side. And people do that at parties. I mean, to me, the top floor should go. Thank you.
Right.
Morris Alexander.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. It wasn't such a long time ago that we gave permission from our own council to build 10 properties in an area inside of the target area of Brooklands. There was controversy because they were so different to the other houses, and that is the whole point. This is different. The only way that we can move on in this area is to break the mould, is to produce developments that are sustainable over many years, using the whole of the view of a magnificent beach beyond it. Most of the housing stock that we see there is of small design, and I don't disagree with that one bit. But there are still buildings there which are timber-clad and rendered board. We're looking for long-term investment. We're looking for an era in which we move away from the Channel 5 on television and get into a brand new concept of how beautiful that area could be and how unexploited it's been over the years, and that we need developers to have the confidence to come into tendering and the confidence to say, I can go there because they understand my designs. Yes, it's radical. Yes, it's tall. But what will follow with it, it might be compatible with that. And over the years, the development will be for above the floodplain, so they become a safe housing. So in effect, if you're looking at that, you're only looking at a 3-storey building because it needs to be that part safe. And there's another part of our peninsula which also has the same problem, and we've seen those recently in this committee and before us for decisions. I like it very much. The problem I have, if I've got any problem, is the parking. And I know that there is somebody else who wishes to bring that up, so I'm not going to dilate on that. But I'm very much in favour of letting this go. And let's give it a chance, and let's break the mould, as I say, and develop something really good and turn this beautiful area into a place worth living in.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. We have got to encourage developers to come into the area, and my only consideration is the same as Councillor Holmes, is that the top flat. I don't know what the financial viability of leaving that off would be to the developer. I think it would look very nice without it. It doesn't look so terrible with it, but I'm unsure about that top flat. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, having been involved with this ever since I've been a councillor, and the fact is we could never do any development down here because the Environment Agency refused to allow the data, which if you read this, you'll see a lot of the data in it, out about flood, about what would happen if when the sea over breaches that wall, and it will, and how it's going to affect the buildings and what the force will be on those buildings depending on the direction of the wind and the height of the water across it. We've now got that data, and it's free and gratis to developers, and that stopped developing down there for years and years and years, because you couldn't expect somebody to try and develop a small plot and then have to pay 15,000, 20,000 on top for specialist advice. So that killed it. We've now got the ability to develop down there, and we're starting the virtuous spiral. So you've got the spiral of deprivation, think of a corkscrew, and then you've got the virtuous spiral where things come up, and this is the start of it. Yes, I could argue with the officers all day long and agree with them all day long on our policies. Yes, it is overbearing. Yes, it is this, that, and the other. But if we start picking and nitpicking, nothing will happen, and we've got this. It will then collapse in on itself, and we'll still be ending up and our successors will be talking about this in 20 years' time. This is our opportunity to go. That flat on the top, we have a similar one, just as a matter of interest, in Frinton, where they shoved another flat on top to get an extra, and they set it back like that, and it's worked very well, I can say. It hasn't been a problem at all, no overlooking, and we can put up, and I'd leave that to the officers to work out later, where you can put up, I don't know what you call it, vanity screens or privacy screens. We did it in Central Avenue, that area in Frinton, where there was an overlooking on, and we just put up a smoke screen that has to go up, and that will stop overlooking of certain properties. And so I'd be very mindful to approve this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Baker.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions for the officers, please, if I may. We approved, and it's on page 70, 1.5 is the paragraph. We approved some flats round the corner, apparently. I'd like to know how high they were in comparison to this. And also, with regard to saved policy, CL15, there are requirements in there. If this development was 3-storey, would it comply with that and with that policy? And I think Councillor Honeywood mentioned it, and I think it's quite relevant actually for all of us to consider, is that there have been no objections by any local residents. The ward councillor, the portfolio of the regeneration of Jaywick are in full support of it. Yes, it's going to be bigger than the surrounding area, but wherever you put a new build in Jaywick, it's going to be bigger because it has to comply with conditions that it's safe. So I'm in favour of this application, but I just want to clarify with regard to the heights, please. Thank you.
Councillor Heaney.
I'm going to be different than everybody else, of course, but I've got no problem with the actual building. If only he'd bought the bungalows either side and just given it a bit more space around it. But it's going to be so overbearing. I mean, if you took the terrace on the left, they'd be able to throw things off onto the bungalow just below it. The bungalow practically touches it. And just because we need to regenerate Jaywick, which we know we do, you can't just ride roughshod over what we normally do. Normally, it's just because it's Jaywick. It's allowed to go in absolutely bang on top of the bungalows with them just going behind. It's just, you know, I'd never approve this or vote for this in another area, and I don't think I can do it here either. It's just because you can literally, as Councillor Holmes says, if you're on that left balcony, you can rain down things on that tiny house, which you can hardly see. I mean, I know they're hardly palaces, these bungalows, but just because they're not, the amenity of the neighbours should not be upset.
Thank you very much. Councillor Everett.
Thank you. We in this committee are used to balancing things, to working out the pros and cons, whether it is more weight on one hand than the other. And I think we have a classic example here of somewhere where we need to make a difficult weighing decision. It isn't ideal. Personally, I wouldn't like the 4th floor to be there either. However, we have what we have in front of us, and we have to weigh that in amongst all of the other competing concerns or positives that are around this whole thing. So we're never going to get the ideal, perfect package. We're always going to have to weigh up the balance. And for me personally, I weigh up the balance to say, I think that actually this should go ahead because it is so desperately needed for Jaywick. This could be the one building that actually makes all of the ones coming behind financially viable. Because at the moment, nothing is financially viable in Jaywick. We have to make it financially viable. And so to do that, we have to take a punt occasionally on difficult buildings that perhaps in an ideal situation we wouldn't want to be the way they are. But we have to be pragmatic and come to a decision that is right for Jaywick, for the people of Jaywick. And I have to say, point made by another councillor, which is this, that if the 3 neighbours that are actually right alongside this potential building had been objecting, I'd be saying a very different story here, because I think that if they had objected, then I'd have wanted to perhaps actually take note of their objections. The fact that they haven't, I think, is actually very important. I think no news in that particular case is good news. So I'd like to propose that we accept this.
Right. I've still got a speaker. Yes, Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Chairman. I put my hand up to speak earlier because I would like to... I would disagree with a lot of my fellow councillors that this is an ugly building. I think it's beautiful. My first thought when I saw it was that this is a building that could be on the seafront at Brighton. It just looks so clean and cheery. I like the design of it. It looks like a wedding cake to me. And I don't see that there'd be any problem with the top penthouse. It looks as though it's been designed as a penthouse on the top there. I think it's quite aspirational for Jaywick. There are lots of empty sites along the avenue as we walked around this morning. Lots of plots there that are overgrown. And I think this would encourage other people to build something similar. The only difficulty I can see is with the parking arrangements. It looks quite tight. Could you tell me how the dimensions of the parking spaces, please? So, as I'm wondering whether they could be more open plan, unless they're structural columns there holding the building up. Thank you.
Yes, please.
You can't see on there, but they do comply with the parking space sizes for enclosed spaces. So you've got 6 individual spaces for the 7 flats, which is, we originally attracted an objection from Essex County, as you'll see in the report, but they changed their recommendation because they've put e-bike charging points in. You've got 7 cycle spaces, and they've accepted that there's a lower car ownership in Jaywick. Sorry, did you want me to come back on Councillor Baker's point?
I'll get you to come back, certainly, Alison, but I'm minded to look at the size of car that's in there, but I think, from my view, you drive your car in, you wouldn't be able to get out of the doors. That's the thing that worries me. It is very, very tight. So that, I think, is why the point was raised. How big is the garage? Yes, I'm going to... all right, you raised the question. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. With the dividing walls, the road is quite narrow, and I think then, with the dividing walls coming out right to the front of the building, I think there might be difficulty with turning into the actual road.
Yes.
And they did provide these tracking drawings as an amendment, and Essex County haven't come back and said they're not workable. It's obviously, it is very tight because the road is narrow, but I'd be worried about removing those, that you're going to weaken the structural stability of the building, which is obviously very important in that location.
Yes, could well be. Sorry, Alison, we interrupted you and you were summing up.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to come back on Councillor Baker's point. I haven't got a plan of the other applications that I've referred to, but they were all at the ends of the road. So as these roads all slope up to the Seaward Road, where you've got the seawall, the land raises slightly, and they're all there, so they've got side roads, so they've got no side neighbours, which was the difference between this application and those. So they've got side roads at the side, but the design, the height, the scale is very, very similar. They're the same detailed design with the white render and the green detailing. It's by the same architect. So they are very similar, but our concern is that because this site is within the core area where it's surrounded by neighbours on all sides, it's a different consideration to the ones that overlook the seafront and are more of a landmark there. You expect to see a taller development where you're overlooking the beach. The reference to Safe Policy CL15, that's at 6.6, it fails almost all of those criteria. The off-street parking is on the ground floor, so it meets that, but that's a very restrictive policy from the 2007 plan. We're not carrying it forward because it's so restrictive and it's not helped to develop Jaywick since 2007. So that's not raised as one of the objections to the application. It's the harm through the extra height and through the close proximity to the neighbours and the overlooking. And yet there has been no objections from neighbours, and Councillor Benison asked if that was a penthouse on the top. It is just one flat, you can't really see that's 1 2-bed flat, so this is its whole private terrace around the side.
Councillor Holmes.
Right. Councillor Holmes.
Councillor Everett said we've got to look forward. We've been looking back now for at least 60 years. It was never looked at when it started. It was bit past this and bit past that, and it ended up that the whole of Jaywick is now a livable area, according to the council. I've actually picked people up and they've said to me that they've been on the net and they've asked for the cheapest rent in England, and it's come out as Jaywick. Now, I do understand we've got to change this, but that is just stuck there. It's going to... I just cannot believe that we can put a 4-storey, 3-storey building, 3-storey livable, 1-storey for cars, smack in the middle of all them little bungalows. I mean, if that was going to go behind the ones on the seafront, it would probably come up about the same height. And I'm pretty sure that when we passed the ones on the seafront, we only passed them for 3 stories. So, and it does drop down. We all know it drops down. It comes into Lotus Way. Even Lotus Way is not as high as that. And I do believe that if we're going to look forward to the next 100 years of Jaywick, I don't think we should have these stuck up everywhere willy-nilly. You're not going to have one building 4 stories high, are you? So that means everything in Jaywick now has got to be bought on bulk just to redevelop it. The actual people that live there and own their places are unlikely to get them to build up 4 stories. They've got to build up 2 stories, which is not the same. I just find that it's going to be a carbuncle maybe for 30, 50, 40, 50 years until something happens that the whole place gets done. And it's already been tried once and it didn't happen. This is not the start of Jaywick to come, because I don't believe it will happen like this.
Right. Councillor Heaney.
I'd just like to go back to the parking. With the 6 parking spaces and the 7 flats, are they going to be numbered parking spaces? Like one will be sold with flat 1, or are they going to have to fight for who has the parking space when they turn up?
We wouldn't normally control that, no. It would be for the developer, would be to allocate them, but we'd just ensure that parking's there before they occupy and it's retained.
Right. Councillor Alexander, then Councillor Baker.
I believe that if somebody doesn't stand up and make a decision, and we don't change what's before us, what could essentially has the ability to be an amazing place to live with land that was suitable above the floodplain, because that is what that has tackled, is gone above the floodplain. I believe that, and I disagree with my colleague, I think things will change there because the demand will be there to make them change. And as houses become available, they will be bought up and more buildings of this ilk will go up. And I think that is the way forward, because there is something that they will aim to reach and see, and that is across that wall and out into the open sea. Because there's no 2 ways about it, Jaywick has the most beautiful beach, and that is an attraction. I bought houses down there. In fact, if I remember right, my family still owns 1 or 2 houses down there. I spoke to the lady who lived in the house, this tiny little house we were talking about. She welcomed it. Her and her cat, they thought it was a brilliant idea that they should erect this and they should make a significant change. We are in a position to make that change and to look and to go back at the end of our time and say, we did that and we made those decisions on that night. And I think that is what we're in right now. although I understand where the officers are coming from, and I agree with them entirely, they're adhering to the policy, but some things goes outside of the policy and becomes a bigger and much greater thing. I say, let's go, let it be built, and let's see how it evolves over the many years, because I'm sure we'll keep a tidy eye on it and make sure it doesn't get out of control.
Right, I'm going to have one more speaker, and that's Councillor Baker, and then we will have to vote. At the present moment, it's looking like a proposal to accept, and if it is, it's contrary to the officer's recommendation, so we shall want to know the principal reasons for the change. Right, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, there's a proposal on the table that we approve against officers' recommendations. As it's a full application, and if we are minded to approve, are there conditions that we would need to ask to be applied for now? And if so, what would they be in officers' opinion, please?
Right. I'll ask Alison if she's got anything further to add.
I can give you a list of recommended conditions if you wanted to discuss them.
I think that's what we're asking for. Yes, yeah. Would be handy.
So, standard conditions, 3-year time limit, approved plans, the recommendations of the Habitat Survey, construction method statement, provision of cycle and car parking and e-bike charging as shown prior to occupation and retained thereafter, no unbound materials in the surface of the parking areas, residential travel packs, provision of bin stores as shown prior to occupation and retained, finished floor levels to be set no lower than 5.605 metres as required by the Environment Agency, development to be carried out in accordance with the submitted flood risk assessment and flood evacuation plan and for that to be updated as required, approval of external materials, approval of privacy screens to both balconies and obscure glazing to living, dining, kitchens at first and second floor, rear and side. As I've said in the report and as members have discussed, the third floor is set well in from the boundaries. So I think overlooking from the windows at third floor wouldn't be an issue.
Right. Now, the proposer, I believe, was Councillor Everett, and the second was Councillor Turner. Those are the conditions that are suggested. You're happy with those?
I'm happy with those. I would want to explore screening on the top floor to ensure that the overlooking of the properties in the road behind are minimised as much as possible. I know we can't eradicate it.
This is a full application, so it would have to be at this stage. It's not... Councillor Turner.
Mr Chairman, I think, if I may help Councillor Everett on this, I think on the top floor, if you actually took the angles off, there's very little overlooking of any properties. The privacy screens, we did do this in Frinton on one, and it's worked very well indeed, and the people who were complaining have not come back to me. I assume they were reasonably satisfied with the solution we came up with. And if you're looking for a reason, I would suggest we return to our emerging plan. Vision for tendering district council. Vision, thoughts, ideas. Where we say, in Jaywick Sands, regeneration projects will continue to raise the standard of living in this part of Clacton. Now, the only way we're going to do this is by doing this. And that is the only reason that's really necessary. This is a vision. We are taking a leap of faith. We are taking a jump in the dark. I do agree with all the rejection that's been put forward. I would argue that if I was on the other side of this argument. But there comes a time when we have to take a leap of faith and look to the future. And I would like to suggest that within 10 years, those singular story buildings will be up to this height.
They will be.
Because it'll be worth their while. This will input wealth. This will be the virtuous spiral. Wealth will start flowing into Jaywick. It took us 50 years to put roads in. 50 years. And it was only through Mick Page, by the way, and County Council that we got I think it was £5 or £7 million to put those roads in there. And take unadopted roads, which is against the policy of county, to put some decent situations in there, and get also I could go on wax lyrical about all sorts of things out in Jaywick. I shan't. That would be my reason for saying it's about the vision. It is our vision. We've agreed to this. We voted on this. So therefore, that's the reason for that.
And to add to that, if I may, and that outweighs the concerns over overlooking and oversighting, whatever the other term is that's used.
Thank you for that, because on other applications we don't want this one thrown back. Well, you built a 4-storey block overlooking somewhere, so that would be a help. Right, you know what you're voting for with this addition and somehow getting the wording of the screen in, Alison. I don't know quite how. I'm going to ask you to vote on it now, please. It is an important one. Well, I won't add any more to it. So those in favour of that, please show. Right. And those against, 1.
2.
And 2. 2 against, 7-2. And I didn't vote, so there's an abstention in there. So that is approved with those conditions. Thank you very much. You've made the decision. I would have liked to have seen the development on the other 2 taking place, because that was approved a couple of years ago and we haven't seen any sign on those. But very quickly, yes.
What was that you wanted to see built? I missed that.
Well, we've agreed planning permission for two of these other tower blocks. I think everybody's back. We've got 3 more applications in front of us. So this one is A5. It appears in the agenda at page 85. It's the Ramsey War Memorial Hall. That is planning application 1800876, and this is an outline application. Turn to Alison again.
Thank you. Yes, this is an outline application with all matters reserved for the construction of 3 dwellings. This is the application site. It's referred to committee by officers because it's contrary to the development plan in approving housing outside of a settlement development boundary. That shows you the site there. You can see it's in a little run of properties, and this shows you the settlement development boundary. So you've got the Ramsey boundary here and the Harwich and Dovercourt, which is a strategic urban settlement. So our biggest scale of settlement is only 400 metres away. So the application proposes demolition of the Memorial Hall. We've granted planning permission under a separate application to replace this within Ramsey Village. And the application complies with Policy Com 3 for loss of a community facility. So we've got no objection in principle to the loss of the community facility. This shows you the site, the rear parking area, and there's no legal agreement to secure the funds for the new village hall, as these properties are likely to need to be sold and occupied before that proposal will come forward, because it needs additional funding to the sale of these properties. So it's not something that we could condition by legal agreement. So it's not in our control. So the application needs to be considered on its merits as a property, as residential development outside a settlement boundary. So this is an indicative site layout. All matters are reserved, so you're only considering 3 properties on the site. They've shown 3 detached properties here. You've got this wide verge, the A120 is right here, and you've got the roundabout where you go off to Ramsey and then this way towards Colchester. So it's got good setback. It's in a row of semi-detached properties. So as you'll see in the report, we don't see any landscape harm. You've got a really strong landscaping belt here, but it's in a row of residential properties, and it's already got a building on there. They're showing these as the indicative elevations, but again, these are just indicative. They wouldn't be part of the approval. So the site is previously developed and contains a building which could potentially be converted to residential use through submission of an application. On balance, in the absence of any harm and with the proposal representing social, economic and environmental sustainability as detailed within your report, we're recommending approval due to the close proximity to the settlement boundary of Harwich here. It's only 400 metres to one of our most sustainable settlements with very good public transport links and services and employment. So the application is recommended for approval as detailed on your papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, speakers, I don't have anybody against or in favour, but Mrs. Suzanne Howe, who is the applicant. Welcome, Mrs. Howe, and when you've got yourself settled and pushed the microphone button down, you've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Suzanne Howe, and I'm one of 11 trustees and the secretary for the charity of Ramsey War Memorial Hall. After securing £70,000 worth of grant funding and opening new play facilities in October 2014, we moved on to the second stage of our project, and with planning permission on our Wicks Road site granted in March 2017, we gave extra time to the project while still maintaining and managing the existing facilities and hosting successful fundraising events. During the latter part of 2017, we submitted our outline plans as it was clear that potential funders would need to see an element of match funding. So imagine our disappointment and distress when we received the bitter blow that our planning application had been refused purely on points of planning policy. If you refer to all of our design and access statements and correspondence to your planning department, you will note our plans are clearly set out and the rationale behind the proposals clearly defined. The development of the new village hall is entirely contingent on funding secured by the Church Hill site. Capital grant funding alone will not facilitate this development, and we seek to work with either a building contractor or grant funder, offering a charge over the Church Hill site. Our new development must be operational before we can place Church Hill on the open market. Highway safety concerns can be squashed as the traffic flow currently with our many user groups far outweighs that of 3 residential properties. From the outset, we have received the unanimous support of the Parish Council, District and County Councillors and members of the public, further evidenced by a community consultation report. With the full support of the War Memorials Trust, our plan is to move the existing memorial stone, encasing it as a lasting memory in the new building. We would hope that timescale conditions set will reflect the setback we suffered as a result of our initial application being refused by delegated decision. The delegated decision in December 2017 clearly stated that the National Planning Policy Framework advocates a plan-led approach. Apparently, growth through the plan-led approach is not outweighed by the benefits. Apparently, there are no public benefits that might warrant this proposal being considered in an exceptional light. I therefore ask this planning committee, is it not exceptional enough to give consent for 3 homes on this site to replace an ageing, inefficient village hall, in turn complementing an already successful and popular recreation area and playground, reuniting facilities, bringing our community together, providing a meeting place and offering community services, giving local clubs and groups a home, providing them the opportunity to develop and grow, providing a sporting home and encouraging exercise and recreation, giving sporting teams changing and toilet facilities, not portaloos and shipping containers, giving volunteer opportunities and hopefully one day creating job opportunities. Of course, this is all reliant on finding supportive grant funders, but with our continued hard work, commitment and dedication and a strong belief in our vision, our charity is confident we can achieve this, but crucially not without local authority support and most importantly you, ladies and gentlemen of this planning committee this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, councillors, it's your chance now. You went on site this morning and you saw the development.
And he will speak.
I've got a personal thing. I completely support it, but when I look along the road and find they're all semi-detached along the road, and I do wonder because they do seem to be very narrowly spaced, whether it wouldn't be better for the design to be a single property and a pair of semi-detached properties to line up with the rest of the road. My own personal thoughts. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on your thoughts, obviously that can be maybe a discussion that the developer can have with the planning officers. I'm glad the lady mentioned about the actual war memorial, and obviously we were on site and spoke to the vice chairman of the parish council, who said what was going to happen to it, and they were going to have a new memorial, etc., etc. So that won't be lost. I think the most important thing is that our officers have recommended approval, although it's against a little bit of policy. The parish council supports it, and the district councillor supports it, and the lady said the Essex County Council supports it. And in view of that, I know we normally have more debate, but I would be quite happy to propose that we accept the officers' recommendation of approval. Thank you.
I'll second it. Right, further talkers?
Nick Turner.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. I'm for this, but they're looking to build an £800,000 facility elsewhere to replace this and to enhance the playground that they've got there, which I happened to be a guest at when it was opened, about 2015, I believe. And it is a superb facility. And they've got playing fields and they've got a nice centre where they can create a hub. I've seen that done in other villages I've lived in particularly in Somerset, and it works very well indeed. And I might say, but it does worry me if this is we are discussing a war memorial. We are discussing, and when I saw the list of those who gave their lives for this country in the First World War from that one town or village really, it is very sobering. And we have to, and I'm very much one for honouring people's memories, and that was built for that. We've had a similar one in Frinton, and I can never imagine us ever consider selling it to build something slightly better a long way away. And so I do have concerns there, and I'm just wondering, and I noticed our officers did say that there is no legal obligation that the sale of this will then go into towards the village hall. Equally, I think I heard correctly, the applicant stating that that they wouldn't be selling this until they've got the funding for the new village hall. Could I have clarification on that, please?
That's my understanding, that this isn't enough to fund that development, so I'm not sure what stage they're at in funding, but the lady talked about match funding, didn't she? So I think it's going to be some time after these are probably sold before that came forward.
Is there any way... Sorry, may I come back, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. Is there any way then we can tie up the two? Because we could, God forbid, in the worst possible world, you could end up with that gone and nothing to replace it.
The difficulty is that if we have a legal agreement on this, that these properties can't be occupied until that building is constructed and ready for use, then nobody's going to buy these properties because that's an unknown entity, isn't it? They're not going to be... It's going to affect the sale of these, which would then affect the bringing forward of the hall. So it's not something that we consider that we could appropriately apply a condition or a legal agreement to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That answers the questions.
Good. Any further questions, Councillor Everett?
Yes, I hope to allay my fellow councillors' fears. I think this is the exact opposite point to what I usually make, is that we're all politicians and so we're used to perhaps occasionally embroidering the truth. I think that in this case, the governing body looking after this, I'm willing to bet that in their articles of association that it quite clearly will say that they actually have to do it within the benefit of the War Memorial Trust. And I don't think it very likely that they would do anything other than what they are actually saying they're going to do. So I put an element of trust here. Perhaps trust I wouldn't give to a politician, but one that I think that to this body perhaps might be appropriately lent. So I would say that perhaps we should trust them and actually not need to put any conditions on it, because I think they'll probably do what they say anyway.
Councillor Heaney.
I saw the Vice Chairman of the Village Hall nodding while you were speaking. So, and I know that they're trying to do this sort of thing in Elmstead Market. And the committees that are set up to do the new Village Hall, or Community Centre as it's called in Elmstead Market, they're going to have to do exactly this, sell the old one to fund the new one, or part fund the new one, which also some developers are putting something towards. And it's very difficult, and these will have to be built, I'm sure, and sold to get all the money. I mean, you know, presumably when they sell them to whatever developer it is, then they'll get the money, and then, of course, they'll go up pretty quickly, I would have thought. But I do have a problem. Again, I rather agree with Councillor White that they look terribly tight, particularly the end one with the small pointy garden. It might be better, but that's not for obviously this committee, but it might be better to have two semi-detached and one detached. But that's not for now. But I agree that this should be given planning permission because, you know, they're obviously trying to do the best for their village. And being a village person myself, and also, Nick, to not disagree with you, but perhaps, I know this is a memorial for soldiers, but maybe the soldiers, if they came back 100 years later, would think, you know, we might have to update the memorial hall for the residents of Ramsey.
Well, yeah, but not for Frinton.
Not for Frinton.
Right. Councillor Alexander, I think. Sorry.
There's one thing that struck me through the whole of this, and talking to the gentleman we met this morning and listening to the address this evening, is the passion that is behind this and the commitment in their voices. And I tend to lean towards the trust element that has been muted here tonight. The war memorial itself, the way it was passionately spoken about, and how precious it is to the whole ethos of the new concept of a building, where it's to be literally kept in mothballs so everyone can see it and looked after carefully, and a new memorial placed outside. All these things are the visions that this charity obviously sees, and I believe in my heart of hearts they will achieve that. And also I think that as we move on, if a village hall, like any other thing, becomes redundant or not fit for purpose, for a group of people to take the tenacity to go out and want to create something new, better, bigger for the people. Remember, the villages grow, and as they grow, the need to facilitate that growth, education and everything. When I looked down at that memorial and I saw those X's mean quite a bit to me because it means Royal Navy. And I watched that very carefully today. And I thought those guys gave their life that we could be sitting around here debating this tonight. And that must be always remembered. And these people, I believe profoundly, will remember that and honour their name. There is another point that is quite interesting, because I could be wrong here, and I will take direction if I am. When they built the 120, there were playing fields, if I remember, attached to this, and they lost a lot of that facility. Yeah. So in theory, the actual place where kids could go and kick a ball and do whatever kids do nowadays and have fun, that has been removed from them because of progress. So doesn't it also follow that progress is a new building? And, but honouring what came before us. And I think that's the point. I'm all in favour of it, and I want to go with it.
Thank you very much. No further comments? No? Alison, anything to add? Or right? I'll test, perhaps I shouldn't from the chair, but I'll just test. Do you think it's not in this application that we ought to put a note that we would prefer, if that is your considered view, we would prefer to see a single and a pair of properties on there when it comes to the full application? Councillor.
As I was the proposer for approval, I think that's a discussion that officers may have with the applicant. And obviously, if reserved matters could come back to this committee.
Yep. Okay. That's a good point. Right. Okay. Well, then we have the proposer, and the second was Councillor Holmes, that this outline permission is approved, along with the conditions. That's the time limit, the reserve matters and the construction management plan. Those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. So we all wish the scheme a great success, I think, is all we'll say. Right. Thank you very much. We now move to the application on page 93, which is an application for 168 Long Road, Lawford, and it is planning application 1800648 full. And Alison gets this one as well.
Thank you. Although the description of development says construction of a dog grooming salon, it's actually for construction of a building, as I'll explain in a second. So the application site contains this residential property, a two-storey semi-detached house, and they want to put an outbuilding in the back garden. The applicant's given us additional details in relation to the level of use. The use is confirmed as 4 to 5 dogs a day by the applicant only, in terms of the grooming and the care. So this level of use is ancillary to the residential use of the property, and it doesn't require planning permission. So the reason that the application requires planning permission is because the building is too high in terms of the residential permitted development limits. The application has been referred by Councillor Guglielmi because it's considered too close to neighbours' property, parking issues, the type of business, and that it's incongruous for the location. This is an aerial image, so it's within a settlement, within a residential area in the settlement boundary, and there was previously an outbuilding here, as you'll see from the photos, that's since been demolished. So this is looking towards 170 Long Road, and again towards the neighbour at the back. So this shows you the application plan. So as I said before, it's an ancillary outbuilding in terms of our assessment. If it had been 2 metres away from the boundary and half a metre lower, it would have been permitted development. But it's 4.5 metres high. Permitted development buildings can only ever be 4 metres high. And if they're within a metre of the boundary, they can only be 2.5 metres. So that's why it's before you for its scale, not its use. The floor plan shows you the use in terms of it being used for the applicant to operate a dog grooming salon. But this is what you're considering. A timber-clad outbuilding in the rear garden, as you can see from the aerial photos. You've got numerous other neighbouring outbuildings. You previously had a large outbuilding here, and the height of the building isn't considered to result in any harm to neighbours, so it's recommended for approval. There's errors at paragraphs 1.4 and 6.8 in terms of it's saying that to be permitted development it needs to be 2 metres from the boundary and 4 metres tall, but it's 4.5 metres, so that isn't correct. Sorry, there's no updates on this one. So it's just that error on the report that it was stated if it was moved 2 metres from the boundary it'd be permitted development, but it wouldn't. It'd need to be reduced by half a metre as well. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Now we have no members of the public speaking in favour or against it. There is no representative from the parish town council or the ward members. Then I go straight to the applicant, Mr. Spencer Campbell. And welcome, sir. And once you've got settled and pushed the microphone, you get 3 minutes.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you very much for listening to my statement tonight. My name is Toby Spencer-Campbell. My wife and I hope to be able to create a replacement for a large outbuilding that was in our garden when we purchased the property around 6 years ago. The new structure will be divided into two main areas, one being the usual garden storage for a lawnmower, garden equipment, etc. The second area will allow my wife the opportunity to work from home, grooming dogs, which she is in the process of retraining for. The intent is to offer a personal one-to-one service, which will not cause any more noise, disturbance or smell than someone owning dogs in their own home, as many neighbours do. The service will be offered by appointment only on a strict drop-off and pick-up basis. There will be no facility to hold dogs for any length of time, and we anticipate opening hours to be during the normal working day, approximately 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. 5 days a week, just to minimise sort of any impact on neighbours. All visiting dogs will be groomed inside the salon, and there are no external holding areas in order to further minimise any noise. We've made a point of working with the architect to minimise impact in the local area and on surrounding properties, so no skylights in the roof, only fitting opaque high-line ventilation windows and natural light from the north elevation via bifold doors. The structure is placed, as you're aware, to the rear of the garden and therefore will not have any visual impact to the sort of street scene from Long Road. And other than grooming, no other services will be offered from the premises moving forward. As previously mentioned, the new structure will be replacing a run-down workshop which was used by the previous owner and was quickly beyond repair over a 4 or 5 year period. This was partly due to the flat roof design, which, despite us sort of replacing it a couple of times, perished very quickly. And it became apparent it was not really suitable for conversion. Bearing this in mind and taking the lead from a close neighbouring property which has a detached pitch-style, annex-style outbuilding to the rear of its garden, we wanted the design drawn up to be sympathetic to the slate-hipped roof style of our main house and surrounding houses, and this was recommended by our architect to minimise the impact again to neighbouring properties from a visual point of view. Thanks very much for attending the site visit today for those who came. As you will see, the building can be reached and will be accessed via an existing double-gated secure side access, which is already established and will not need to be changed for the purpose. Being double-gated, along with a further gate to enclose the rear garden, we hope will add extra security to any dog that is on the premises. We recently, over the last few years, amended and changed the driveway and refurbished that just so it was redesigned in order to give a large parking area. And as we're onto Long Road, obviously with no gated restrictions, so cars can easily pull off and pull onto the road. The position of the property has clear visibility in both directions, as you will have seen. And as the business will be via strict appointment only, we see very little impact on traffic movement on and off of the main highway. The site, as you're aware, is within the highly populated area, and there are numerous large residential developments taking place, as you've already alluded to today, and we feel that the salon would offer a useful service to the local community, with a lot of clients therefore being within walking distance as well. We feel that other businesses as well in and around the Long Road area, such as Heart's Delight Garden Centre and Bunny Barn's small animal boarding kennels, have set a precedent that this type of business can run alongside residential properties without causing too many issues.
Thank you very much. Can you just wind up now?
Yep, certainly. We're aware that Redbury Cattery was also granted approval in January 2017 for a 10-cat boarding block in the garden of a semi-detached property on the A137 in Ardleigh. All of these, which I've mentioned, have the business owners still living in the original main residence. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Although this was brought to us by Councillor Guglielmi, he isn't here. But I think I'm right in saying one of his criticism was it was close to the primary school. But those of you who remember the development that is taking place a little bit further back, the proposal is, in fact, to make the main entrance to the primary school from the back and close that front door. So hopefully that question will not even worry us at all about the traffic on that road. Right, councillors, you've been. Yes, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Myself and my wife, we did in the early days run a very similar project from our garden. It caused no problem whatsoever to the neighbours or parking or anything else. As regards the size of the building, let's face it, if we was to refuse it, they would just clip it here, clip it there and clip it there, and it would still be there. It would still be doing the same thing because they don't need any planning permission. But they would not have the room that they wish for. We've been there. It's not going to interfere with the neighbours, as I can see. I think we should go ahead and approve it. Thank you.
So I have a proposer, right? And
Liz would second it.
And Liz will second it. Do you wish to add anything, Liz? Before I take the vote, any further comments?
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question. I mean, I'm in favour of this, but there seems to be a sort of kerfuffle about it, really. Is this, shed for a better word, is it higher than the annex next door? There's an annex on the side of the house, which overlooks, the backs onto their I've forgotten their, the Spencer Campbell's garden. That annex there, that's backing right onto it, isn't it? I mean, the shed's not going to be higher than that annex, is it?
No. Yes. Sorry, Councillor.
Chairman, that was when we were on the site visit. That property to the right of the photograph is actually number 1 Milton Road, which is mentioned in the report. When we were on the site visit, I actually asked the lady that showed us round how big their previous shed was, and it would appear that it came up to about the level of or just above the guttering of Milton Road. So I think we can say that didn't cause any problems then, so I can't see that causing problems now.
No windows on that.
And no windows either. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I have a proposer, I have a seconder. There's no further comments on it, so I'll take it the vote. Those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. That is approved. And now we come to the planning application A7, which is on page 99. It's land adjacent to Little Thatch in Mill Lane, Thorpe-Le-Soken. It's planning application 18 oblique 00781. This is a full application. Right, and we turn to Alison again.
Thank you. If I could just refer you to the update sheet, which has got a couple of corrections and an additional neighbour letter. So the application is for full planning permission for one dwelling. This is the application site. It's been called into committee by Councillor Land. He's concerned about the conservation area location. Recent construction in Mill Lane has caused significant disruption, and it's a small rural lane. The site lies within the settlement development boundary in both the saved and the emerging local plan, so the principle of a dwelling is accepted. It lies within Thorpe Conservation Area, and Mill Lane, which it seeks access from, is a public right-of-way. We had a previous refusal on the site, which was reference 171933, in April, I think that was. So the reasons for refusal, I'll just scan through to that plan. The reasons for refusal of this application were the impact on Mill Lodge here, that they had a triple living room window here that was going to be overshadowed, and no habitat survey had been undertaken. The site was overgrown with brambles and coarse vegetation, so it was refused for those two reasons on the 10th of April this year. So this application seeks to overcome those reasons for refusal. The design is unchanged, as you'll see if I go back. So the siting, they've pushed the property back so that it sits behind that affected window to address the loss of light concern. Following the previous refusal, the site was also cleared, and officers considered that as the site was recently cleared, a Phase 1 habitat survey wasn't therefore necessary. But just for context, we've had recent approvals, 2017, this property here. We've also had a replacement dwelling here and another property approved here, which I think are the ones that Councillor Land is referring to in his concerns. You've also got a Grade 2 listed building here, Mill Barn Farm, which there would be no material harm to its setting due to the separation distance and the intervening residential properties. These are views of the application site. As you can see the neighbour here. Mill Lodge and the window which was referred to in the previous reason for refusal in terms of loss of light. And the other neighbour, Little Thatch, is behind the hedge there. These are the floor plans for a 3-bed chalet bungalow. And that was the refusal. As you can see, it's got parking and turning to the front. Officers are satisfied that the change to the siting has removed the material harm in terms of loss of light and outlook to the neighbour in terms of assessment against the Essex Design Guide criteria. And the application is therefore recommended for approval. Thank you.
Right. Now we have a speaker, member of the public, speaking against the application, Ms. Kirsten Hanson. Is she present? Right, thank you. Now, welcome and get yourself settled and get the microphone alive, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, hi, sorry, just before I start, I thought Daniel was going to speak before me, and so I'm here to speak on behalf of the residents of Mill Lane, just not for myself, and we totally support everything that Daniel's about to say about the wildlife, the lack of ecology survey, and I know when you guys visited today there wasn't much in my pond, but I've taken a picture of a great crested newt that appeared later in the afternoon, so we absolutely support everything he believes in terms of wildlife and the highways. But I'm now, in my 3 minutes, going to confine my comments to the detrimental impact the proposed dwelling will have on the property of Little Thatch, where I live, and Mill Lodge, and generally in the conservation area of the southern end of Mill Lane. So I live in Little Thatch. It's a single-storey thatched cottage to the south of the proposed plot. The proposal that we're talking about tonight is to squeeze a modern new build into the narrow garden space between my cottage and Mill Lodge. The house will stretch, as you can see from the picture, the width of the plot and is located very close to the boundaries of both my property and Mill Lodge. Despite what the council said over there, we would argue very strongly that this causes us problems for both of the existing properties in terms of loss of light, privacy and noise nuisance. So it's located to the south of Mill Lodge, and it will block out, the new build's going to block out the sunlight from the kitchen, the dining room, the lounge and the patio area. It's been moved to improve on this situation, but actually it makes it worse for Mill Lodge compared to the application previously that was rejected. But it also blocks out the north light from a very small north-facing window in my property. The new build also causes problems for both of us in terms of loss of privacy. So while the windows facing the bedroom, my bedroom in Little Thatch, have opaque glass in them, it's true that all the back-facing windows of the new build property, which include 2 sets of large patio or bifold type doors and all upstairs bedrooms, overlook the downstairs window into my bedroom. It also, all of the property at the back overlooks both the patio and the gardens of both the properties that exist. We're also worried about nuisance noise because it's located so close to the bedroom window. Any sort of patio activity or even open doors in the evening is going to cause a problem, and fire issues we're concerned with barbecues or anything on the back of the patio being so closely located to my thatch cottage. In terms of appearance, the new build is totally out of keeping with my property in terms of size, elevation and the materials used. It's much taller than my thatched cottage and it protrudes in front of it, so it's going to be very visually dominating. But I'm not here just to complain about the impact it has on both of the neighbours. It has a much wider impact on all of the properties at the southern end of Mill Lane. So currently, the plot separates the more modern properties to the north of the plot from the older properties to the south of the plot. So in addition to my thatched cottage, that includes the old mill, which dates back to the 1600s, and Mill Barn Farm, which is actually a listed properties. All of these properties are low-lying, they're of countryside appearance, and are representative of some of the oldest properties in the whole of Thorpe-Le-Soken. And are of special architectural and historical interest. They epitomise the conservation area that the proposed new build will be situated in down that southern end of the lane. We would argue that the proposed site doesn't enhance or preserve the current status of the southern end of Mill Lane, and it's totally out of keeping with the appearance of the other properties, and it causes a cramped look to the whole area. Moreover, passing this application, we're worried that it sets a precedent to other people. Remember, this application is actually for the side garden that used to belong to my house long before I lived there. What if this sets a precedent for other residents in the area to start selling off bits of their garden for development? Down Mill Lane, people have very big gardens. So, for instance, the neighbour to the north side has 2.5 acres garden. Okay, so we're really concerned that this is going to set a precedent. When does this end? Finally, I just want to say that in total there's been 6 applications to build on this plot. They've all been rejected due to the narrowness of the plot, the traffic safety issue, the impact on ecology, both of which Daniel's going to talk about, and the detrimental impact it has both on Little Thatch, Mill Lodge and the conservation area in general at the southern end of Mill Lane. I'm here as a representative of the residents of Mill Lane to passionately argue that this should be rejected too, along on the same grounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Reference has been made to him, so now's the time for Councillor Land to come and take the chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. I hope you enjoyed your trip to quaint and calm and peaceful Thorpe-Le-Soken today. I'm sure you'll agree the hanging baskets look splendid this time of year. In relation to this application, I won't claim to be an expert on planning, but there is just a time sometimes when you feel something inside you says that this isn't right, and upon further contact from my esteemed colleagues, Mrs Hanson, the Blackmans and the Hudgells, who are all here this evening, I knew I'd be before you tonight. You took a trip into a very small, private, unmade road this morning, and as you turned into Mill Lane on your right-hand side, there's a building that has recently been hit by a construction lorry that came to deliver building materials to a house already mentioned by the officer that's in construction down there. So it just sort of points out the rural nature of that lane, the tightness of the entrance, and issues around and surrounding access. You took a trip down that unmade road towards a location which has been excellently described by Mrs Hanson, down a small track down to a very narrowed part of that bottom end of Mill Lane, the narrowest part, I might add. And that location is in the conservation area, and I've been here before in front of you folk to try and protect the conservation of Thorpe-Le-Soken. Conserve, by way of its nature, is where the word conservation is formed, and at the moment we seem to not to be able to do that. as Mrs Hanson pointed out, it's steeped in historical importance, that bottom end of Mill Lane. The old mill you will have seen, and the conservation area was put in to protect and conserve these types of environments, and I vehemently protest that we try and do so once more again this evening. I think the balance of why other developments have been allowed within the lane were well put before me, in terms of that bottom end is quite different to the top end, and of course I've already mentioned the narrowness of how the lane goes at the bottom. Highways. My dear friends, the Highways Department. I was here tonight to side with them, because on the application that was mentioned to you a moment ago by the officer, they were objecting to the application. We've had a bit of a change of staffing at the Highways Department, and it just goes to show how all applications are very subjective to each individual. The new officer has decided that, it being the last plot, we should go with an approval on this one now. So I don't sit here tonight with their backing, but they still did mention that some of the points raised by the man who's left us, who came up with the initial decision, still stand. It's a public right-of-way. It's a very small lane. It's additional traffic. Most of these new houses have 2 to 3 vehicles that accompany them. So I'm disappointed with that in respect of highways, but I still think it's a very pertinent issue to what you're about to decide this evening. Ecology. I just feel this has been swept under the table. It's an important space there, or it was. It was cleared over time, fair enough. But I don't think enough attention to the detail of what may or might or could live in there has come forward. And our dear animal friends are not here to speak after me. So I think what the point made around great crested newts, this, that and the other, I think there is scope to consider the wildlife in that area. There's got to be bats in that area. It backs onto the churchyard. There's all sorts of things going on in there with an ecology sense. The hedge line running between the property, the new proposed property, and Little Thatch, that's an established hedge line that's been maintained for many years, and if that was to be impacted or removed, it would be very detrimental to Little Thatch. And already mentioned, but the impact on the neighbouring properties. It doesn't look to me a property in keeping with what we might like to see there if we were to permit development, which I don't think we should, and I feel that consideration must go to those neighbours that will be deeply affected by a development either side of them. And can you imagine the construction traffic fitting into that little narrow gap and then having to reverse round into Little Thatch and then having to reverse round onto the green? It doesn't look very practical to me. So to surmise, I did feel that this was one of the ones in my mind that I felt something needed to be said about. It didn't feel right to me. I'm desperate to protect the conservation area in Thorpe. And if we're looking for development that is right and in the right place and adheres to the MPPF, I feel this struggles to meet some of the criteria laid out. We have a 5-year housing supply, which is being more and more backed up by the appeals that we're seeing coming into the council. So I'm sorry, but on this occasion I do not agree with the principle of development on this site, and I wish you well in making your decision.
Thank you very much. Now finally the agent, Mr. Peter Legree.
Evening, Chair, members. Apologies, first of all, that I couldn't attend the site visit this morning. I was giving evidence at public inquiry in Malden Council, so that was rather lively, but quite successful. In this particular instance, I'll start off by saying that planning permission was refused in April, so 3 months ago. That planning permission was refused on 2 points. Now, whenever you consider a revised application, you must consider only those matters that have been before. This scheme is identical in all respects other than the dwelling has been moved back into the plot. Legally, and in terms of reasonable behaviour by an authority, you cannot introduce new issues that have not been discussed or determined previously. Therefore, you only have 2 matters that you can consider this evening. If you fail to do that, that's unreasonable behaviour. That's a matter for the Planning Inspectorate, and my client will certainly pursue that route. Those two issues are ecology, and the site has since been cleared. There is no habitat on the site that is suitable for any protected species, and that's been confirmed by your officers in writing. So that would be clearly raised if the needs for an appeal. The second issue solely relates to the impact on the window at Middle Lodge. This scheme has been moved back to satisfy those concerns. I myself believe that the earlier scheme was the better of the two schemes. But nevertheless, your officers, in discussion with them, have suggested that the property be moved back. That satisfies their concerns in terms of the loss of light to the triple window. That overcomes that single reason that's remaining. Those are the matters before you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Legree. Right. Just ask if Alison's got any further comments. No? Right. In that case, councillors, it's yours.
Can I have some confirmation from our officers on the comments made by Mr. Legree? Because I haven't heard that before, and I don't see any history in our papers, and I was completely unaware there'd been a previous application on this site.
So was I.
Obviously, so if I may have some comments on that, then I think all of us would like some clarification, which would help and aid our comments, Mr. Chairman.
I don't believe it came before the Planning Committee, did it?
No, it didn't. It is fundamental, and that was my question to the solicitor. Is this so? I'm treating it as a new application, but...
It is a new application.
If you look on page 102, you can see the history. So in 171933 was the proposal for one dwelling that was refused under delegated powers, which was this one.
Yeah.
As Mr. Legree said, the design is identical. The siting has changed. You can see it's been pushed back, and there's been some alterations to the parking area. So the reasons for refusal of the previous application were that Mill Lodge is situated very close to the neighbouring boundary of the application plot. There was an existing triple window on the southern elevation here, which served a kitchen diner and currently looks out onto the vacant plot. Due to the narrow nature of the application site, the proposal is situated approximately 1 metre away from the neighbouring boundary and will lie adjacent to the neighbouring dwelling. The proposal creates a loss of outlook from the kitchen diner of Mill Lodge due to the development being sited so close. It would be oppressive and overbearing. It's been assessed in relation to the Essex Design Guide, and it failed the combined criteria. Due to the close proximity, loss of light and outlook, it was considered it would cause significant loss of outlook and create an overbearing impact to that neighbouring amenity. And the second reason for refusal was the absence of a habitat survey, which was previous to the site being cleared. It was very overgrown with brambles and coarse vegetation. So the application now has pushed the property back to overcome the concern in relation to the neighbouring window, which you'll see is addressed in the report, that it now passes the Essex Design Guide daylight calculations.
Yes, as you raised the question.
Yeah, so, but we've refused it. That doesn't establish the principle of development. Is that correct?
It does, yeah, because we would have had to refuse it on the grounds of residential property being unacceptable there.
Sorry, can I just get this? I think it's an important point for all of us. Is that it's about establishing the principle of development. Has that been established?
It's in the settlement development boundary, the saved and the draft plan, so the principle is accepted for residential development there, subject to the detail of the proposal. So that didn't form a reason for refusal. The detail of the proposal did in terms of neighbour impact on Mill Lodge and absence of a habitat survey.
Thank you for that.
Yes, Councillor Heaney.
Well, they should have had a habitat survey, because in the pond just by the hedge are great crested newts, and great crested newts leave the pond, particularly in the winter, and walk around, and they're certainly walking in here. So it would be more sensible if they'd had a habitat survey, which they would have discovered the great crested newts. And I believe, and also, in my view, that still takes the window, is in front of the window. The window of Mill, whatever it's called, Mill Lodge, is not, it's much more towards the end there of the, you see, it's not, there's Mill Lodge goes all round down. It's still going to take the light out of the window, and it's now going to take the light out of the patio behind the house, and it's north. The north is there, so they're not going to get any south light in the back of their garden at the back. So if north's there, south they're not going to get any south-facing light on their patio, or even west-facing light. It's going to be put into total shade, the patio behind there, so that affects it. And I know there's other things too, which we ought to have discussed about, which, who owns the hedge? Now that's the other thing. That hedge will have to be taken out, because they won't be able to build up to Little Thatch without that hedge in there. So the hedge will be going. In fact, there seems to be some planting, as far as I can see, on the bottom on the left-hand side, but further back there's none. Now, Little Thatch has been maintaining that hedge for years, because there's nothing in here that says that the new house owns that hedge. I think it's highly unlikely, so they will not have rights to cut it down and take it out. So, do you have any comments on that?
I'm not aware which boundary the hedge lies within.
It's on the left-hand side boundary. It's between the Little Thatch there. There's no way that they're going to be able to fit that house in without ripping fit that house in without ripping out this hedge on the left that we're talking about there. And then it's going to take the light out of it's a one-storey house, Little Thatch. It's obviously very old. It's in a conservation area, and there must be policies about conservation areas which we must be able to touch on. It's totally out of keeping. It's totally out of keeping with the house, the very ancient house. So I think it's quite inappropriate, and I certainly won't be voting for this at all. And the plot is very narrow. It's a much narrower plot. I had a good look at all the plots all the way down, and this is a narrower plot than any other plots down Mill Lane. It's squeezing a quart to a pint pot, that's what it's doing.
Councillor Everett and then Councillor Baker.
Thank you. I have two issues to explore today. The first one, as you'd expect from me, is about ecology. I do not accept what the agent has said, and that will come into my second comments. But regarding the ecology, the fact that the place has been cleared does not remove the need to do a Phase 1 survey. Because, for instance, as we have been told tonight, there is a pond not within 500 metres, not within 50 metres, but probably within 10 metres of this plot. Well, I was looking at it generously. And that is said to contain great crested newts. Now, we are not in a position where we can legally take a decision on this application unless we know the rights and wherefores of that particular circumstance. And to quote the officers on another application that's been before us tonight, they point out paragraph 118 of the National Planning Policy Framework 2012 requires that local planning authorities conserve and enhance biodiversity, whilst paragraph 109 requires local planning authorities to minimise impacts on biodiversity. Paragraph 99 of Circular 06/2005 states that it is essential that the presence or otherwise of protected species and the extent that they may be affected by the proposed development is established before planning permission is granted. Otherwise, all relevant material considerations may not have been addressed in making the decision. I won't go on with the rest of it. It's in there on page 73. So that in itself, in my view, is actually probably an area where I would actually lean towards refusing this application rather than deferring it for these reports. But the second issue, and this is where I'm in conflict with the agent, is in terms of the listed buildings that are adjacent to this property. You cannot say that the listed building's location is just its location in terms of its boundaries. It is the setting that is important, and the setting spreads out much further and wider than the physical location of the boundaries of the property. And so, therefore, when we look at this, we are looking at something that is affecting the setting of a listed building, because this property or this area forms a green wedge between the new properties to the north and to the southern part. So it's all about the setting of this location. And so I would quibble with the agent in saying that actually just because this hasn't been brought up before doesn't make it not relevant. And for me, those two reasons alone are enough to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Baker, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions for the officer. Mr. Legree mentioned that we had two things to consider. One being ecology, and I've written down very briefly and paraphrased what he said, was site cleared, no protected species on site and no ecology required. How does he know there's no protected species on there if he's cleared the site and hasn't destroyed them? And he also mentioned the fact that that's in writing from our officers, so I'd like a clarification as to what our officers have written with regard to having an ecology report or not. I'm with Councillor Everett in that this site needs an ecology survey. We've had the lady from next door, the cottage next door, she also mentioned this afternoon bats that roost potentially in her house. So how can we come to an informed decision either to approve or refuse without all that information? Because otherwise that we're not doing what we should be doing. So I'm either with the refusal or a deferment to see if those can be dealt with. Thank you.
Further points? Yes, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. May I ask the officer to confirm, if you can, the listing of the two buildings? There were two listed buildings, I believe. Or was I wrong? Was it only one?
I think it's two.
Was it grade 1 star, grade 1, grade 2 star?
Grade 2, Mill Thatch. Mill Barn Farm, it's grade 2 listed here.
And what about the mill? What about the mill?
That is... I think you can see that on your...
Yeah. Can you shove your mic on when you're talking?
99.
Alison's mic.
Page 99 on the Ordnance Survey Plan, you can see Mill Barn Farm, which is the grade 2 listed building, and then the old mill opposite, which as I understand isn't listed. It's Mill Barn Farm that's grade 2. And all of that land is within the conservation area.
Yes, while Alison's looking for the letter.
I'd actually like to move this for refusal rather than mess around with surveys, because even if we do have surveys, and they actually don't see a great crested newt at that moment, it's still all the reasons, you know, it's still overpowering. It's, the Little Thatch may not be listed, but it's extremely old house, and it's certainly going to take the light out of Mill Lodge and probably Little Thatch as well. And I don't actually think that it's moved past the window. Because the window was very far on the back.
Right, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I've been reading up the conservation areas, as you well know, it's my pet subject. And if we look at it on page 182 or 172, take your pick, protected places in our emerging plan, and you'll see that A is scale design, particularly in relation to the neighbouring buildings and spaces. And I think that can be argued quite successfully one way or the other. But the one that really intrigues me is B, materials and finishes including boundary treatments appropriate to the context. Now, I've had a major hedge removed from my property next door, and we lost, I counted it, 15 variety of birds, which was quite shocking. I didn't realise we'd lost so much. We lost a lot of our birds, and we've now actually had a complete ecological change in our garden. So that hedge is very, very important, and thereby building 1 metre from it would affect the boundary treatment. So in other words, that design would have to come in my opinion, at least 2 metres from that hedge, so it would not be affected when building. I understand that the principle of build now is established, because obviously you can build, because we've designated this area where you can build. Accept that. But I still think, and I've just Googled on this little thing here, Google Earthing that, and as far as I could see, it's exactly what I thought. I've got a fee, I couldn't see a lie about it, because I'm not a lover of these things, I like my big computers. But I do believe that plot did belong to Mill Lodge at one stage, and Mill Lodge was built to enjoy that plot. Anyway, the plot's been sold off, fine, okay. Was it the other way around? Well, anyway, whichever way it is. But I'm certainly in agreement that it's for refusal on this. And I do very much like Councillor Everett's comment that should be a green gap to separate the new build from the old build in this quaint backwater of Thorpe-Le-Soken.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Councillor Heaney.
I think that the hedge is bound to belong to Little Thatch, because obviously when they sold the plot off, they would have put a boundary hedge in. It's not been built up. Nobody's lived there. So why would anybody put a boundary hedge in if on a place that they didn't live in? So it seems to me that must belong to Little Thatch.
Right, I'm going to just ask Alison's found any details, as you asked her to
I
look.
can't find an email between the case officer and the agent, but I've just got an update from the case officer to myself today, where she confirmed that it was agreed that a Phase 1 habitat survey wasn't required due to the site being cleared after the application was refused and the short time frame between the applications. So we did confirm that, but I can't find that on the file. I've also got the larger scale plan, as it's not clear on here. The front wall of the property starts at the front wall of their window. So the window is this side, it goes right up to the front wall. So that is shown on the plan.
That's true.
The previous reason for refusal, as stated, this was only on the 10th of April 2018, so it's a very strong material planning consideration. If members have had additional information today in relation to likely protected species on the site, then we could definitely defend reason for refusal 2 in relation to the need for a habitat survey. Reason for refusal 1 only related to the impact on Mill Lodge and the impact on this window, whether members feel that's been addressed by moving it back in terms of the Essex Design Guide calculation, because it sits behind it in plan form. It passes, it doesn't fail in both plan and elevation. So officers' view is that we couldn't sustain a loss of light refusal on those grounds. And again, loss of light impact to a rear garden area where you've got, this is 7.5 metres high, the dormers are set quite far in, so in terms of where a fence line would lie, this would be what would be facing the neighbour and obstructing the light, so it wouldn't be significant. So again, officers consider that those grounds have been overcome, but we could defend reason for refusal 2 in terms of impact on protected species. And again, in refusing the previous application, we considered impact on the setting of the listed building, which is only mill barn here. These structures aren't listed, even though they are heritage assets, obviously, but non-designated. And the whole site is within the conservation area, but that was all considered when we determined the previous application. And in light of existing residential development, we didn't feel that there would be harm to the setting of the listed building or the conservation area that would justify a reason for refusal on those grounds.
Right. I've got 2 speakers, and I think I've got a proposal as well, either with Councillor Everett or Councillor Heaney, or vice versa. But I'll take the 2 speakers, and they are Councillor Everett and then Councillor Alexander.
I would like to propose that we refuse this application on the following grounds. The lack of Phase 1 ecology survey, the siting of the development and its proximity to the listed building, so it's affecting the listed building, what's the word? Setting. The other one is on the grounds of design, that the design that we've been on training recently for design, and one of the things that we were actually pointed out about was the nature of proximity of buildings creating a perception of overshadowing or overlooking. And it isn't about the physical relationship of the building to the building, it is about the perception of how that feels. So a building's corner right against a window would give that perception. So my final reason for refusal is the amenity of adjoining owners. Does that make any sense? Have you got three?
And I would agree with those.
Yep. And if you... Yep.
Good. So I've got a proposer and a seconder. I did indicate Councillor Alexander wished to speak.
Chair, with the motion before us, and I think Councillor Everett most eloquently has covered everything that I might want to say, I think I will say let the motion be put, and I will refrain from speaking.
Right. Just before I do, I'm going to turn to the officer, see whether she wishes, because you've got two very good reasons, but this is against...
Three reasons.
I just wanted to clarify the last reason and the impact on the neighbours. Is it just Mill Lodge, or is it Mill Lodge and Little Thatch?
Both adjoining.
Little Thatch.
I've got it. Councillor Everett is proposing and Councillor Heaney seconding.
That's fine.
We know the points, they've just been outlined. Those in favour of refusal, please show. That is unanimous. That application is not approved. Not approved. That's the end, I think. Right. I've formally got to close this meeting. We have got to the end, but we need a closure date.
Hey,
and so
hey, shush, shush. Shush, Dan, shush.
Now it's gone quiet, I can formally close this meeting. But I couldn't do so while the noise was going on. Thank you all very much.